Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. Marvel. The Saga begins with Mutant. Chapter 61. Surrender, or Die. On the barren island, Lancelot was covered with a golden red energy layer, like a Star Wars god, with a pair of ruby eyes overlooking the mutant below. Lancelot has tested his ideal body, broke out with all his strength, and easily beat everyone on this small island. Even Haiwangshao is not good enough in front of him. And as Lancelot issued an ultimatum to the group of mutants, Black Emperor Shao was the first to stand up. He raised his head and looked up at Lancelot with cold eyes, and he was shocked to see the golden red energy all over Lancelot's body in his heart. This guy, why does he also have the ability of energy absorption? Haiwangshao's face was gloomy at the moment, and then imitating Lancelot's appearance, he will be able to explode through his feet. However, the imaginary flight did not come, and a mushroom cloud exploded with Haiwangshao's feet as the center. Haiwangshao's energy, 0-20 inches exploded in front of Lancelot, and it looked so rough. This is entirely because of the energy absorption and release possessed by Lancelot's ideal body. The energy control is more handy. Die to me. Haiwangshao's eyes were gloomy. He controlled the energy under his feet to form a mushroom cloud with huge amounts of impact, and then the berserk energy rushed towards Lancelot in midair. Haiwangshao. Lancelot let the energy released by Haiwangshao cover himself, and was swallowed by his own body. The golden energy layer on his body seemed to be thicker now, like an energy battle suit. Boom! Lancelot lowered his head and glanced at Haiwangshao, then slightly adjusted the center of gravity of his body. His whole body turned into a ball of golden energy, and instantly appeared in front of Haiwangshao. His right hand was like iron clamps, pinching Haiwangshao's neck. Now, who else will resist? Lancelot pinched Haiwangshao's neck with his right hand, lifted it up, and glanced proudly around. Both Professor X and Magneto are silent at the moment. Mr. Lancelot, we surrender. Haiwangshao was breathing hard at this moment, his face turned purple at a speed visible to the naked eye, looking at Lancelot, who was so close at hand, who looked down on unparalleled. Haiwangshao finally surrendered. Very good, Sebastian Shao, you will win the glory and evolution that belong to Mutant. Lancelot let go of Haiwangshao casually, and Guang looked at Haiwangshao appreciatively. We surrender. Behind Haiwangshao, the Red Devils of Hellfire Club, Riptide and Dragonfly Girl all looked at Lancelot with apprehensive faces, and then bowed their heads to express their submission under Haiwangshao's gesture. What about you? Surrender or die? Lancelot glanced at the Hellfire Club staff with satisfaction. He was not worried about Haiwangshao's false surrender. There was nothing that Gios couldn't solve. Lancelot turned his attention to the direction of Professor X and Magneto. At this moment, these two only 5-level mutants are using telepathy to communicate. I'm going to kill him, kill Haiwangshao. Magneto roared angrily. In the spiritual world, he had been lost by hatred. Now he saw that Haiwangshao was not dead, and he also joined Lancelot's evolutionary home. This made Magneto resent even Lancelot. Calm down, Eric. We are no match for Lancelot. Professor X tried to calm down Magneto's anger with psychic power, but it was of no avail. Magneto was still furious, and Professor X had no choice but to erase all Magneto's memories of Haiwangshao. Lancelot, we surrender. Professor X glanced at Magneto guiltily, and after erasing Magneto's memory, Magneto calmed down. Losing his hatred, Magneto looked at Lancelot and became extremely fanatical. At this moment, Magneto had already regarded Mutant as his only one. Mutation and glory. Magneto knelt on one knee, couldn't help but stare at Lancelot, and said in a somewhat fanatical tone. Crash. Even Professor X and Magneto surrendered. After looking at each other, the X-Men also knelt in front of Lancelot. Very well, comrades, your surrender will witness the glorious future of Mutant. Now, I, Lancelot, the King of Mutants. Lancelot glanced at the submitting mutant, and his whole body floated in the air again. In a pair of red eyes, a fiery red bird flapped its wings and croaked. Chirp. In the sky, behind Lancelot, a flying bird god like a phoenix spread its wings, exuding terrifying spiritual fluctuations. Serve me as king, serve me as lord. Lancelot looked at all the mutants in Hellfire Club, and directly issued the Gios order. A new king ascends the throne. The mutants surrendered. Bang bang bang. Along with Lancelot's Gios, the evolutionary mutants who had been on the deck of the Soviet main ship before, all appeared on the island, and appeared beside Lancelot. White Queen Emma and Mystique Raven stood beside Lancelot, Sabretooth Victor and Gambit Remy led the mutants to the sides. "My king hail!" All the mutants, including the mutant who just surrendered, shouted frantically at this moment, and in the eyes of everyone except Professor X, a fiery red flying bird appeared. Gios categorical order. "My king Yongyao!" The deafening shouts resounded throughout the island. Lancelot was suspended in the sky, standing proudly, his eyes shining brightly. He gently raised his hand. Like a real king, Lancelot's noble temperament set off by his graceful and luxurious clothes, as if a new king had come into the world. Lancelot finally boarded his own stage. The day of Mutants' first battle is the time when Lancelot's new king ascends the throne. Monster, monster. Inside the U.S. warship, General Wilhelms looked at Lancelot proudly hanging above the island in horror at this moment, and then directly made a decision. Fire and destroy these monsters. Following the order of General Wilhelms, dozens of warships on the high seas all turned their turrets and aimed at the direction of the small island. Bang bang bang. Missiles were quickly released from the warships, and within a few seconds, they spread all over the sky on the high seas. Looking at the densely packed missiles, Lancelot's expression became indifferent. Cub, court death. Lancelot's entire body suddenly turned into a mass of golden streamer, appearing at the center of the missile 4.2 almost instantly. Looking at the incoming missiles, Lancelot just waved his hand lightly, and the missiles exploded with Lancelot as the center in an instant. Groups of huge amounts of fire shrouded the sky above the open sea, and these fires, shockwave, energy, etc., all rushed towards Lancelot's body. As if Lancelot was an energy black hole, all the huge energy was sucked into Lancelot's body. Over the entire open sea, densely packed missiles were like fireworks, with only light but no explosion sound. Rumble. Lancelot was in the center of the explosion tide, and he felt warm all over his body. The golden energy layer on his body shot straight into the sky at this moment, like a god descending into the world. "My mutant comrade, get rid of these cubs. This. How is this possible?" On the high seas of Cuba, the U.S. warships are currently performing missions to escort the waters. According to the information they have received, the Soviet warships will cross the border today. However, the imaginary scene of a war between the two countries did not come, and the Soviet warship remained on hold. The original order of high-level Americans to go to war as soon as the Soviet Union crossed the border seems to be nonsense at this moment, and it is extremely ridiculous. However, although the threat of a world war has disappeared from the invisible, General Wilhelms has discovered another fact that is far more serious than a world war. General Wilhelms discovered a group of monsters, which possessed terrifying abilities like devils. Set off a tsunami, the Air Force ships are just waiting. And what did General Wilhelms see now? He actually saw that in the center of the densely packed missile explosion, a human being exuding golden light was absorbing the explosion energy without any damage. God, is this really human? That's the equivalent of a missile that can easily blow up a small island. General Wilhelms was terrified at the moment, and his adjutant was so frightened that he broke out in a cold sweat. Then they saw through the porthole that the Asian man who had absorbed the energy of the missile just raised his right index finger lightly. Boom. At this moment, Lancelot only felt that the energy in his body was extremely vigorous, and he could easily control the energy in his body and release it. I saw Lancelot raised his right index finger, a ball of dazzling red energy filled his fingertips, and then suddenly expanded into a beam of bright beams of huge amounts of red energy, which instantly hit a warship. Rumble. The huge warship exploded immediately, and a glaring red light enveloped the entire warship. Inside the warship, countless soldiers ran away like ants on a hot pot. Boom, boom, boom. However, in the next second, the entire warship experienced constant explosions one after another, and then the warship sank instantly. Fire, fire quickly. The scene in front of him simply made General Wilhelms unbelievable, and he issued an order to fire by radio in horror. Another round of missiles was released from the warship, spreading all over the sky. Lancelot just looked at the missiles in front of him with great interest. Behind Lancelot, Magneto stretched his right hand forward, and all the missiles were still in midair. Kakaka. Bursts of metal brittle sounds resounded in the air. Magneto just turned his arm slightly, and all the missiles turned around. What fuck? All the warships and soldiers were terrified, and some soldiers even began to pray blindly. Eric, don't do this. On the small island, Professor X said with a dignified expression, full of unbearable persuasion. Professor X can't bear to see so many lives die, on the one hand, and on the other hand, once the US warships are wiped out here, there is no doubt that the top US leaders will directly launch a war. The benevolence of a woman. Lancelot looked back at Professor X with a look of disappointment in his eyes. Professor X, you have to remember that kindness will only make the enemy worse. The fury of thunder can make the enemy frightened. Lancelot sneered and uttered deafening words. No, it's not the same. Professor X obviously couldn't understand Lancelot's philosophy, and the kindness and compromise he had always adhered to made him extremely entangled in his heart. Magneto, continue. Lancelot ignored Professor X, and he issued orders to Magneto indifferently. Of order, my king. Magneto nodded excitedly, then pressed down with his right hand, and the missiles in the sky suddenly came from where they came from, and went back to where they came from. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of explosions resounded constantly, and the entire high seas seemed to have entered a war scene in an instant, and warships fell silent amidst the explosions. Go, kill them. Lancelot suspended in midair, giving orders. And following Lancelot's order, Phantom John brought a dozen mutants into the warship in an instant. And the former Hellfire Club's Red Devil Azazuo also teleported to another warship with Black Emperor Shao. Inside the warship, Gambit Remy's right hand constantly released cards, and soldiers holding weapons were blown out immediately. Sabretooth Victor directly transformed into a 5-meter Sabretooth, rampaging through the warship, leaving no blade of grass in his path. One by one, the mutants began to release their power to their heart's content. And Magneto, the man of the scene, is the most efficient here. He just suspended in midair, waved his hands again and again, and the warships capsized and sank in an instant. An hour later, there was no US warship in sight on the entire high seas. On the small island, only Professor X and the X-Men did not make a move. At this moment, they looked at the open sea like a gunpowder battlefield in horror, and they were stunned for a while. Fack, what did you do? On the small island, Agent Mora, who had been shooting soy sauce, pointed at Lancelot with guns in both hands, and then asked loudly. Oh, here's a fish that slipped through the net. Lancelot landed on the ground, and then looked at Agent Mora with interest. Lancelot didn't know that Agent Mora had also appeared on this small island. He had been ignoring her before, which was not normal. Obviously, Professor X had been protecting his little lover with psychic power, so much so that even Lancelot subconsciously ignored her. Mola, put down the gun. Professor X looked at Lancelot with some trepidation when he saw Agent Mora's actions, and then comforted Agent Mora. However, at this moment, Mora obviously lost control of her emotions because of the destruction of the US warship. She looked at Lancelot angrily, and then directly pulled the trigger. Boom! A muffled gunshot sounded. Lancelot just looked at the bullets in front of him calmly, and Magneto, who was standing next to Lancelot, directly raised his right hand and waved it. Unprepared, the bullet removed by Magneto's right hand pierced Professor X's body. Looking at Professor X, who fell to the ground in pain, even Lancelot couldn't help being stunned for a moment. Professor X is paralyzed because of fate. Looking at the remorseful Magneto and Agent Mora, Lancelot slightly shook his head, then walked in front of Professor X, grabbed Agent Mora by the neck, and through him raised it. My king, please forgive Mora. Seeing the cold killing intent in Lancelot's eyes, Professor X begged in pain. It's just a human cub, since it's you who interceded, so what if you let her go? However, there is always a price to be paid to save people. Professor X, don't you want to see war? Then use your ability to stop it. Lancelot glanced at Professor X, and threw Agent Mora to the ground. Come on, follow me back to Mutant House, the brainwave strengthening device should have been set up. Lancelot glanced at Mutant on the island, and then everyone formed a big circle. Pong pong. With two phantoms in succession, all the mutants on the island disappeared. The impact of Mutant's first battle had just begun. Siberia Base, House of No. 2 Mutant Evolution. In the core area of the huge ice base, a group of scientists in white coats are busy. At the center of this group of scientists is an extremely advanced instrument. Pong pong. A huge phantom suddenly appeared from this area, and then Lancelot and others walked out of the phantom. My king. The busy scientist saluted Lancelot respectfully. Raven, arrange a residence for our mutant comrades. Lancelot nodded, then turned to Mystique Raven and ordered. Yes, my lord. Mystique Raven was already familiar with the job, and she took all the mutants to the living quarters. In this area, only Lancelot, Professor X and X-Men are left. Dr. Leonard, inject a recovery potion for Professor X. Lancelot glanced at Professor X's injury, waved to Dr. Leonard, and said. As you order, my king. Dr. Leonard glanced at Professor X, then took out a tube of recovery potion from his white coat, and injected it directly into Professor X's body. With the injection of the recovery potion, the painful expression on Professor X's face disappeared instantly, and the pain in his waist also melted away as quickly as rain and snow. A minute later, Professor X had fully recovered from his injury. What kind of potion is this, so magical? Professor X's pupils shrank slightly, and he looked at Lancelot in surprise. This is a recovery potion developed by Darwin through adaptation to evolution. Like this potion, there are many more in the House of Evolution. Lancelot took a meaningful look at Professor X, and then brought Professor X and others here. Core experimental area. This is a brain-wave strengthening device. Beast Hank McCoy, who had been following Lancelot all this time, looked at the huge amounts of device in front of him, and was inexplicably surprised for a moment. He is very familiar with this instrument. This is the brain-wave strengthening instrument developed by himself. However, compared to the brain-wave strengthening device in Xavier Manor, the strengthening device here is undoubtedly bigger and more advanced. My lord, what are you planning to bring us here? Professor X frowned slightly. He didn't know what Lancelot was planning to bring him here. As I said, there is a price to pay for saving lives. Now, it's time for you to pay the price, Professor X. Lancelot took Professor X to the brainwave strengthening machine and sat down, and then put a sci-fi helmet worn on Professor X's head. Use your ability to change the thinking of all high-level human beings and make them forget this incident. Lancelot finally put forward his own request. After hearing Lancelot's request, Professor X's eyes widened with disbelief. Professor X finally understood what the cost of saving lives was that Lancelot said. Lancelot, the king of mutants in front of him, intends to forcibly change the brains of all the upper-level people on Earth with his spiritual power. This is simply a crazy idea, although I can do it through the brainwave strengthening device, but it will change the thinking of all high-level human beings. Professor X showed pain for a while, which was contrary to his philosophy. Even if he knew that he could do it, he had always been strict with himself. Even if the world was about to have a third world war, he never had such an idea. But looking at Lancelot's unquestionable expression at the moment, Professor X dared not refuse, because he knew that he had no capital to refuse. Charles Xavier, you clearly possess the sword of Damocles, which can change the minds of the entire human race with a single thought, but you hide it and allow humans to bully you wantonly. Should I say you are naive? Or stupid? Lancelot looked at Professor X's uncertain face and said sarcastically. As Lancelot said, it is obvious that Professor X himself is Mutant's sword of Damocles. As long as he is determined to suspend this sword above the human head, the entire human race will not dare to act rashly. Professor X obviously has a solution to the mutant problem once and for all, but he abides by his so-called benevolence, so that in the end, the future is reversed, and the Sentinel developed by humans almost destroys the entire mutant group. Now, unleash all your potential and stop the world war in its cradle. Lancelot followed the temptation, and pressed his right hand on Professor X's shoulder. In Professor X's eyes, a flying bird fluttered its wings and burned, and Geass went berserk. In this state, Professor X's inner hesitation and struggle all disappeared. Boom! Professor X directly activated his own spiritual power, and the huge machine in front of Lancelot suddenly burst into light, and then Lancelot standing next to Professor X seemed to be in the starry sky of the universe. Countless stars are constantly shining, and billions of stars shine together. Even Lancelot is a little dazzled. Among these stars, some red light flashed occasionally, and Lancelot knew that it was the mutant among humans. We found them. Professor X's pupils contracted slightly, and scenes appeared in front of Lancelot. The White House, the military's secret base, and the homes of congressmen. As long as they are on the Earth, all the high-level Americans are present in front of Professor X at this moment. At this moment, the President of the United States is furious because of the destruction of a warship on the high seas of Cuba. Even when he was about to give a televised speech on war, the journalists around him were all ready. At this moment, in the White House of the United States, the President is confirming the final speech. Quote, "War, this is war." The President began to read the speech silently, and then nodded to the Secretary of State beside him. "Let's get started." The President nodded, and then all the reporters immediately poured into the White House. Today is a historic moment, our fleet on the high seas of Cuba. At this moment, the whole world is paying attention to this President's speech. Do it, Charles. Lancelot also saw the President's televised speech. He reached out and patted Professor X's shoulder, and Professor X immediately used his psychic power to take over the President's consciousness. Our mail-good fleet on the high seas of Cuba, because of the haze of the Cold War, caused soldiers to be nervous, and detonated the arsenal under wrong operations, which led to a series of chain tragedies. This is a disaster, and it should be an event that human beings should be vigilant about. We should not impose our own mistakes on each other. In order to remember the lessons of this time, and to allow human beings to welcome a better future, I declare that the United States will no longer conduct Cold War deterrence. The war is over. Boom. Following the President's televised speech, the whole world was shocked. At the same time, the high-level U.S. military expressed their support for the President and would no longer mobilize for war. The haze of the Cold War disappeared in an instant. And as the United States withdrew from the Cold War, the top Soviet leaders also expressed their views that they would withdraw from the Cold War and work hard to develop the economy. Congratulations, Professor X, you have prevented the Third World War. Now, world peace. Lancelot, the House of Mutant Evolution, turned off the brain wave strengthening machine, looked at Professor X, and said meaningfully. With Professor X quietly changing the minds of the highest levels of humanity, the Cold War came to an end. The world has entered a stage of rapid development. After resolving the Cold War crisis, Professor X asked to leave the House of Mutant Evolution, and facing Professor X's request, Lancelot agreed without hesitation. Of the mutants who participated in the first battle, only Professor X was not controlled by Geass. For Lancelot, Professor X is an unstable factor. So Lancelot let Professor X return to his Xavier estate. Following Professor X's departure, there is also Wolverine Logan. Although Lancelot already controlled Wolverine Logan, after hearing that Wolverine Logan wanted to leave with Professor X, Lancelot did not stop it. On the one hand, Wolverine Logan is no longer a threat to Lancelot. On the other hand, Lancelot needs Wolverine Logan to start the era of mutant reversing the future. After Professor X and Wolverine Logan left, Mutant Evolution House ushered in rapid development. It only took Lancelot a month to completely control almost all 790 top scientists in the Soviet Union. During this month, Lancelot mobilized all the KGB agents to search for traces of Bolivar Trask all over the world, but found nothing. Lancelot speculates that it may be the reason why there are still 10 years before the plot of Mutants' reversal of the future in 1974. Therefore, Lancelot temporarily gave up the search for Trask, and began to develop the Mutant Evolution House with all his heart. 2 months later, in New York, USA, a biotechnology company named Evolution Glory was established, and quickly released antibiotics for various diseases. Once the antibiotics developed by Evolution Glory were released, they swept the entire United States and quickly became a giant in biomedicine. 3 months later, Evolution Glory Biotechnology Company has spread all over the world, and the Mutant Evolution House led by Lancelot, with the support of huge wealth, began to develop rapidly. Time flies, but a year has passed in the blink of an eye. In 1963, it really passed too slowly. Lancelot was sitting on the top floor of the Evolution House base in Siberia at the moment, overlooking the huge BFBI base below. After a year of development, the base that was originally empty is now crowded with people. There are thousands of mutants of all kinds and tens of thousands of scientists and soldiers in the entire base. Azazuo, Lancelot called calmly. Behind Lancelot, a group of red mist quickly appeared, and then the red devil Asazo appeared in front of Lancelot. My king, please order. The red devil Asazuo knelt on one knee and said respectfully. Take me to the Antarctic. Lancelot ordered, letting the Red Devil Asa left to teleport himself to the doctor. In the center of Antarctica, this is the coldest place. But at this moment in this cold area, there is a special troop patrolling. This troop is bare-chested and has blue skin. Everyone is powerful, and they are still chatting and laughing in the extremely cold Antarctic. Pong! In the center of the group, a cloud of red smoke appeared, and then Lancelot walked out of the red fog. My king hail! The special forces, who were talking and laughing, immediately knelt down on one knee and saluted respectfully after seeing Lancelot. Get up! Lancelot looked at this army with satisfaction. This is an adaptive army built by the Evolution House. Extreme Cold Warrior. All the soldiers of the extreme cold troops were injected with a cold resistance factor produced by Darwin to adapt to the extreme cold weather. Under this cold resistance factor, these soldiers can resist the extremely cold environment, and metamorphosis turns their skin into blue. It can perfectly save its own heat. They refer to themselves as the Jotunheim Warriors of Earth. And there are still many adaptive troops like the Extreme Cold Warrior. Have you found it? Lancelot nodded to the Extreme Cold Warrior, and then walked towards the central area. In this area, Mutant Darwin is currently shining with blue light, observing the central area. For Darwin, the extreme cold is the place where his natural ability can be displayed, and his body has automatically adapted to the cold here. My lord, we have found the Valkyrie plane, but, strangely, there is no one you were looking for inside. Darwin walked in front of Lancelot, and a cloud of heat automatically radiated from his body, dispelling the severe cold for Lancelot. Is it really not anymore? Lancelot didn't have any surprises. He came to the central area, which had been dug up at this moment, exposing the huge ice layer inside. Inside the ice layer at the moment is a very advanced-looking fighter jet. This is the vehicle of the Hydra Red Skull, the Valkyrie. During World War II, in order to save the world, Captain America Steve Rogers crashed into the Antarctic while driving the Valkyrie, and was subsequently frozen. According to the plot, after decades, S.H.I.E.L.D. will discover this plane, and then thaw out the frozen captain inside. However, at this moment Lancelot looked into the plane, but there was no sign of Captain America at all. Seal this place up, I'll take care of Captain America's matter. Lancelot took a deep look at the Valkyrie plane, with a playful smile on his face. Lancelot definitely knows very well that what he travels through is the Marvel Universe where the MCU and the Mutant integrate with each other. However, whether it is the MCU or the Mutant Universe, Lancelot has a hurdle that he cannot get around. That's Marvel's most disgusting time travel ever. That's true of Mutant Days of Future Past. The same goes for Avengers Alliance IV, Endgame. And it just so happens that whether it is Mutant Reversing the Future or Avengers Alliance 4, the final battle, they all take place in 2023. That is to say, when reversing the future, when Mutant travels back to 1974, it happens to be the time when the Avengers Alliance superheroes travel through time to fight the young Thanos. Traveling through the past, reversing the future. Lancelot sneered, scoffing at Marvel's time-traveling theory. I hope my universe won't be ruined by those members of the Avengers Alliance. Lancelot murmured, now it's 1963, and there are still 11 years to go before reversing the timeline of the future. System, conduct a lucky draw for pupil surgery. For a year, Lancelot has not conducted a lucky draw for pupil surgery. And after learning that the 4 superheroes of the Avengers Alliance may have started time travel, Lancelot felt a sense of urgency. Siberia Base, home of mutant evolution. Lancelot is sitting in a quiet room, preparing for the pupil lottery draw. In 1 year, he has accumulated 3 secondary pupil lottery draws. Only one time away, there will be a lucky draw for the God-level pupil technique. However, Lancelot is not in a hurry. There are still 11 years before the plot of reversing the future begins, which is enough for Lancelot to grow up. System, let's draw a secondary pupil technique. Lancelot said softly. Ding, the system lottery draw has started, and it has been detected that the host has 3 chances for the pupil technique lottery draw, and the first lottery draw is now going on. Ding, the first lottery draw for the pupil technique is complete. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the secondary pupil technique vision. Single quote. Lancelot only felt his brain hum for a while, and then he gained the ability of pupil art and self-awareness. Pupil art consciousness, also from the performer of Mayan City. Its ability is to control any electronic equipment with the spirit, and the spirit is electronic. To put it simply, the visual ability is similar to Bradley's variant ability, but it is more powerful. Vision allows Lancelot to mentally control any electronic device, and his spirit can completely separate from his body and survive in the online world. This is an ability similar to spiritual immortality. After awakening the vision, even Professor X cannot erase his own thinking. Go on. Lancelot once again sank his mind into the pupil technique draw. Ding! Congratulations to the host for obtaining the pupil technique Future Eye. Single quote. Future Eye, from the legendary Brave Man, has the ability to see the future that is happening. Future Eyes. This is also a good ability. Lancelot smiled. He was worried that he would not be able to see the future, and could only passively accept the future. Now that he has the future eyes, he can see clearly future situation. Ding! Congratulations to the host for obtaining the Eye of Sharjah. Single quote. The Eye of Sharjah comes from Saint Seiya. Saint Sharjah created a pupil technique that can superimpose its own energy into the eyes and seal it up. When it is used, it can burst out at once. The Eye of Sharjah, store your own energy until it explodes. Lancelot muttered to himself, and then sealed all the huge energy in his body in his ruby eyes. The Eye of Sharjah is very practical for Lancelot. His body can energy absorbing, but this kind of absorption has a limit value. Once the limit value is reached, energy absorption will no longer be possible. And now, with the Eye of Sharjah, Lancelot can seal all the absorbed energy in his own eyes. Vision perception. Lancelot's pupils contracted slightly, and his right hand imitated Professor X and pressed it on his temple. Boom! Lancelot only felt his spirit vibrate for a moment, and then his spirit came out of his body, and spread all over the base. No, not just the base. Lancelot found that as long as he wanted, he could instantly control all the networks and electronic devices in the world. Truly be everywhere. However, the price for this is that he needs to abandon his body and completely electronicize his mind. Just as Lancelot was wandering through the network with his eyesight wantonly, he suddenly discovered a strange frequency. This frequency is very hidden, and it cannot be detected by any advanced equipment in this era. But in front of Lancelot's vision, there is nothing to hide. Captain, are you still adapting to post-war life? I'm fine, better than I've ever been. Two familiar voices appeared next to Lancelot's ears, and then Lancelot used his sense of sight to invade this special communication. Chi. In front of Lancelot's eyes, there were bursts of electric current sounds, and then a picture appeared. It was a base, and it also belonged to a secret base somewhere in Siberia. At the moment in the base, the Hydra agents are constantly busy, and in the center of the base, Captain America Steve Rogers, wearing the uniform of the Hydra captain, is sitting on the seat that originally belonged to Red Skull Schmidt, staring at him. Hail Hydra! In front of Steve Rogers, Hydra scientist Dr. Zola raised his right hand and enthusiastically shouted the slogan of Hydra Hail. Dr. Annie Zola, report on the situation of the Winter Soldier. The Hydra captain also held up his right hand, solemnly said the slogan of Hydra Hail, and then asked. Captain, the Winter Soldier has fully recovered, and all soldiers have been brainwashed. Dr. Annie Zola quickly reported, while Hydra Captain Steve Rogers frowned slightly. How is the Winter Soldier serum replicating? Steve Rogers is more concerned about the Winter Soldier serum than the revived Winter Soldier. Captain, the Winter Soldier serum is reproduced from your Super Soldier serum. At present, it will take a certain amount of time to perfect it. Dr. Zola frowned. Ever since the Hydra captain appeared, Hydra has been integrated all the time. Although Hydra flourished under the leadership of this Hydra captain, but also Dr. Zola always had a special feeling that this Hydra captain had a different purpose. Trash. The captain of Hydra snorted coldly. He glanced at Dr. Zola indifferently, and then pressed his right hand on the earlobe. The latest crisis in this world is to reverse the future. Why not kill Trask in the cradle? Hydra captain asked, but there was a brief silence on the other end of the communication. Captain, after you have experienced it, you will know why we didn't kill Trask in the cradle. The communication sounded again, and this time, the previously relaxed voice became extremely heavy. Really? Then, what happened to the mysterious King of Mutant? The Hydra captain asked again, and the answer was a brief silence. I don't know either. The communication sounded and then stopped abruptly. The Hydra captain couldn't help curling his lips, and then crushed the communicator. Back to the future, Sentry, Mutant. The future is really troublesome. The Hydra captain glanced at the huge Hydra base in front of him, thought for a while, and then made up his mind. Either way, I still feel like I want to nip the danger in the bud. The King of Mutants is too dangerous for the future. The captain of Hydra muttered to himself, then stood up from his seat, his gaze became gloomy. Hail Hydra, Captain Hydra, Siberia base, home of mutant evolution. Lancelot consciously saw Captain America Steve Rogers, who should have been frozen. But in this era, the Captain of the United States has transformed into the Captain of Hydra, and has become one of the leaders of Hydra, controlling the Hydra base in Siberia. However, Lancelot is not interested in this Hydra captain. What he is really interested in is the person who is communicating with the Hydra captain. Lancelot felt that his ability was continuously released, and his spirit followed the network and saw the existence of Captain Hydra. At the same time, he followed the communication network of Captain Hydra and went straight up. Then, Lancelot saw an interesting scene. In Hawaii, a burly man wearing stars and stripes is sitting on a bench at the moment, admiring the beautiful scenery in front of him and having a talk with the Captain of Hydra. Captain America Steve Rogers. That's it, Lancelot suddenly realized. When he saw another captain, Lancelot had already realized the cause and effect. Apparently, this Captain America on vacation in Hawaii is from the future of Endgame. According to the plot of the Avengers Alliance 4, Endgame, after defeating Thanos, Captain America began to be responsible for the return of the Infinity Stone. After returning the original stone, the Steve Rogers from the future did not choose to go back to the future, but stayed in the past, and fulfilled the agreement with Peggy Carter. Sure enough, as long as it is the Muck universe, the future Captain America cannot be avoided. Lancelot shook his head slightly, and then turned off his self-awareness. The appearance of Captain America in the future indicates that the timeline has been disturbed. If it was Lancelot before, he was helpless about the future, but now that he has the pupil technique of the future eye, Lancelot can see the future through the future eye. Future eyes. Lancelot's red pupils had countless images flickering non-stop, and then Lancelot only felt as if he had got the perspective of God. The future, which was originally like a fog, gradually revealed its true colors in front of Lancelot. 2023, Xavier Talent Institute, New York. All 5-level mutants come together: Professor X, Magneto, Shadowcat, Wolverine Logan, Sunspot, Bishop and more. Lancelot looked at the future mutant in the Xavier Genius Academy, and frowned slightly. He didn't see himself, nor did he see the figure of the Mutant Evolution House. Lancelot zoomed out his field of vision and looked down on the whole New York from a high altitude. At this moment, New York has been turned into ruins. On the ruins, countless sentinels shuttle and dance unscrupulously. We should leave, we should follow in the footsteps of my king. At this moment in the Xavier Genius Academy, the aged 5th-level mutant looked at Professor X angrily, and said in a deep voice, "Eric, it's too late. My king can't come back." Professor X said with a bitter smile on his face. "So, who is the king you are talking about?" Shadowcat, as an awakening mutant in the new era, does not know any king. "My king, Lancelot, is the king of mutants, who once led mutants to create a glorious evolutionary home. However, due to an accident, my king, together with the great family of evolution, were all transported into the universe by some kind of force, and got lost in the vast and deep space of the universe." Professor X's eyes showed a touch of reminiscence, then he spoke. "Charles, what should we do next?" Magneto and others looked at Professor X, the future Professor X, and smiled wryly again. "There is no way but to use Shadowcat Katie's ability to teleport Wolverine Logan back to the past," Professor X said in despair while sitting in a wheelchair. "Professor, Sentry is coming." Just after Professor X made the decision to reverse the future, a group of space doors opened, and then Mutant came out of the space door flickering. "Get ready to fight." Professor X gave the order immediately, and then all the mutants began to fight with Sentry. And Lancelot frowned slightly after seeing the countless Sentry appearing in the Xavier Genius Academy. Then he looked at a Sentry, and began to release his pupil technique, Vision. Lancelot only felt that his spirit went upstream, poured into the future time and space, and then attached to the future century. For a split second, Lancelot felt like he had a little control over the future of Century. However, just a second later, the link was forced to break. But Lancelot's spirit returned to his body, and the future picture disappeared instantly. Did it fail? Lancelot shook his head helplessly. He originally planned to use his vision and future eye abilities to directly possess the future Sentry. However, because time and space are not stable, Lancelot's vision can only control Sentry for a second. Maybe, when the future Shadowcat establishes a space-time channel, I can transmit my spirit there. Lancelot thought to himself. Through the eyes of the future, Lancelot has already learned that the reversal of the future will come as scheduled. And he didn't find himself on the future timeline, which means that this timeline is probably a time branch. Now, we just need to wait patiently for the arrival of the future reversal. A smile appeared on the corner of Lancelot's mouth, and then his body floated into the air. Let's meet Captain Hydra while we have enough time. Lancelot was covered with a golden energy layer, and then his whole body soared into the sky. On the Siberian ice field, a golden streamer galloped past. In just a few minutes, Lancelot had already appeared above the Hydra base, looking at the thick ice sheet in front of him. Lancelot raised his right hand, and a dazzling beam of light rushed straight down in an instant. Rumble. The thick ice sheet exploded in an instant, revealing the Hydra base inside. Captain Hydra, aren't you going to look for me? Now I'm here. Lancelot's pupils condensed slightly, and then Lancelot's voice was transmitted to Hydra base through his vision. Captain, what should we do? Dr. Zola was terrified at the moment. He had already received news about the Mutant Evolution House a few months ago, and he even knew the horror of the Mutant Evolution House. Lancelot, one of the variables in the future. Inside the Hydra base, Hydra Captain Steve Rogers is also dignified. Through his future self, he has learned everything about the future. After being awakened by himself, Steve Rogers has been committed to protecting the future from changing. For this reason, he did not hesitate to use his powerful calendar area. Future variables must be killed in the cradle. Hail Hydra! Siberia, Hydra base, numerous Hydra soldiers quickly filed out. They chanted slogans and stood ready. Lancelot, the future without you will be more stable. In front of the Hydra soldiers, the captain of Hydra led 6 newly released Winter Soldier soldiers, looking at Lancelot indifferently. Tell me everything you know. Lancelot looked at the Hydra captain indifferently, and launched Geass directly. The eyes of the Hydra captain, who was still extremely indifferent, were suddenly occupied by Saga. The Hydra captain struggled for a while and then surrendered to Geass. The captain of Hydra began to tell everything he knew, and through the telling of the captain of this era, Lancelot finally had a detailed understanding of the future. Just as Lancelot guessed, the Hydra captain in front of him was indeed unsealed by Captain America, who came back from the future. The original intention of Captain America in the future is to let the self of this era become a lock of mutant. That's right, it's mutant. From the 1960s to the 1990s, Mutant was active, and during this period, superheroes did not appear, and even Captain Marvel had not yet appeared. Just in case, Captain America Steve, who came back from the future, awakened himself who was still sleeping, and told him the future, making him a lock of mutant. With Steve Rogers' super soldier physique, it is no exaggeration to say that he can solve 90% of mutants. However, neither the captain of Hydra nor the future captain expected the appearance of Lancelot at all, and under the leadership of Lancelot, mutant strength has been rapidly increased. So much so that the lock arranged by the future captain lost its original meaning. So that's it, is Captain Yinhead specially designed to limit the growth of mutant? Lancelot's expression turned cold. Mutant, there is no need to limit. Lancelot waved his hands, and a mass of energy was released by it immediately. Boom, boom, boom. The Hydra captain, Steve Rogers, who was the first to bear the brunt, raised his vibranium shield immediately, but although the Hydra captain reacted quickly, the Hydra soldiers behind him were blasted into the sky by Lancelot in an instant. Lancelot just looked at the Hydra captain indifferently, then waved his hands one after another, and the Hydra soldiers in front of him were instantly wiped out. Just a few minutes later, the huge Hydra base had already turned into a sea of flames, and the captain of the 5-headed snake looked at Lancelot angrily. Frozen ray. Lancelot glanced at the Hydra captain, then took out a special firearm with his right hand, and pulled the trigger directly at the Hydra captain. A beam of extremely cold rays burst out from the muzzle of the gun, and then instantly enveloped the Hydra captain. Under the shocked eyes of the Hydra captain, his body was instantly frozen. Azazo, throw this lump of ice to the Antarctic. Boom. As soon as Lancelot's order was issued, the Red Devil Azazo appeared here, and then brought the frozen Hydra captain to the Antarctic, where he was frozen again. What happened to the captain of Hydra was just a flash in the pan. After Lancelot took over all the experimental data of the Hydra base, he handed over the mutant evolution house to Silver Fox Carla. And Lancelot took White Queen Emma and Mystique Raven to New York, USA. Lancelot changed suddenly and became the chairman of Evolution Glory Biotechnology Company, and then Lancelot settled in New York. In 1964, Lancelot performed his second vision, adding the Red Devil's teleportation to his ideal body. In 1965, Lancelot performed the third awakening, adding control kinetic energy to his ideal body. In 1967, Lancelot observed the future, and the mutants who reversed the future were still being hunted down by Sentry. The number of mutants has dropped to less than 20. In 1969, the House of Mutant Evolution finally succeeded in conquering cancer and aging. Dr. Leonard and others reversed aging and regained their youthful bodies. In the same year, the mutants of the Mutant Evolution House ushered in the first wave of population explosion, and the number of mutants reached 20,000. 1970, New York, Evolution Glory Biotech Headquarters. The X-shaped headquarters building echoes the opposite Stark Industrial Building, and on the top floor of the company, Lancelot is standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking at the whole of New York. It's been 1970 in a flash. Lancelot felt a little emotional. Since he obtained the self-healing factor of Wolverine Logan, Lancelot has obtained immortality. For the concept of time, it has become a little fuzzy. Especially when using future eyes to observe the future, Lancelot often confuses time. Mutant reverses the future, and it's finally coming. Lancelot overlooked the New York City below him, and then his whole body turned into a layer of red mist, and disappeared on the top floor of his company building. New York, Manhattan Avenue. At this moment, in a building, a cross-age Stark Industry Expo is being held. Howard Stark, the president of the Stark Industry Group, is standing in front of his company's booth with a depressed face, looking helplessly at the opposite booth. There is the booth of Evolution Glory Biopharmaceutical Company. What they are exhibiting at the moment is a youth serum that can eliminate wrinkles and delay aging. On the booth, a wrinkled old woman suddenly rejuvenated after being injected with youth serum, and the wrinkles on her face disappeared. The effect has been displayed, and it immediately attracted the attention of all the ladies. They surrounded the booth with crazy and excited eyes. Miss Raven, is this true? My God, this is literally every woman's dream serum. Evolution Glory. Evolution Glory. When will the youth serum be released? I want to buy 100 bottles. Countless ladies were crazy about it, but Mystique Raven was standing on the stage with an elegant face and outstanding temperament, looking at Howard Stark opposite him meaningfully. And just when all the women were going crazy, a cloud of red mist appeared inside the Stark Industrial Expo, and then Lancelot walked out calmly. Mr. Lancelot, you've started to disappear again. The moment Lan 620 Slot walked out, Howard Stark had already seen Lancelot. He greeted Lancelot and joked with a smile. Mr. Howard Stark, congratulations, you have your first child. This is a gift for your child. Lancelot walked up to Howard Stark, and threw a bottle of pale gold potion to Howard Stark casually. Recovery serum. Mr. Lancelot, this is really too precious. Howard Stark froze for a moment, then declined. It's just a bottle of potion, it's not expensive. Lancelot gave Howard Stark a meaningful look, and said with a chuckle. Yes, in 1970, Tony Stark was born. At the same time, it was also this year that Howard Stark, who was in front of the Strategic Science Corps' New Jersey base, would meet his superhero son. The plot is finally on the right track. There was a smile on the corner of Lancelot's mouth. He reached out and waved to Mystique Raven on the booth. Mystique Raven immediately walked to Lancelot's side with graceful steps, and then fell into Lancelot's arms very naturally. Mr. Lancelot, you are so blessed. Looking at the blonde Mystique Raven with a hot figure, Howard Stark was about to go crazy with envy again. Raven, let's go to the Xavier estate. 1970, New York, Manhattan Avenue, Lancelot walked out of the Stark Industries fair with Mystique Raven. Yes, my king. Mystique Raven, who was beside Lancelot, instantly changed back to her own blue skin. Teleport. Lancelot embraced Raven with his right hand, and his whole body instantly turned into a cloud of red mist and disappeared. New York, Xavier Estate. The decadent Professor X is drunk at the moment, and Beast Hank is taking care of Professor X's daily life. In 7 years, the entire Xavier Manor has become extremely desolate. Although Professor X is not paralyzed at the moment, but after forcibly using a brain-wave strengthening machine to erase the memory of high-level human beings 7 years ago, Professor X is full of guilt and spends all day drinking to relieve his worries. For 7 years, his spiritual power has not advanced but retreated. Pong. Inside the manor, Lancelot teleported over with Mystique Raven, and Beast Hank, who was supporting Professor X, immediately came to Lancelot. My king. Beast Hank transformed into a beast gorilla form, and saluted Lancelot respectfully. Hank, how is Professor X? Lancelot glanced at the drunk Professor X, and then asked. My lord, the situation of Professor X is not optimistic. He has become dependent on alcohol, becoming an alcoholic. Beast Honshu said with a bit of hatred. The state of Professor X at the moment makes Beast Hank very helpless. Professor X, who was once high-spirited, has become a drunkard in just 7 years. And the reason for the decadence, in the eyes of all mutants, is even more ridiculous. Raven, wake up Professor X. Lancelot passed Beast Hank and walked to Professor X's side. Looking at this slightly vicissitudes of Professor X, Lancelot shook his head helplessly. These years, Lancelot has been busy with the affairs of the Mutant Evolution House, and neglected to manage the mutants under him, causing Professor X to become like this because of self-blame. Crash. Raven poured a glass of water casually, and then splashed it on Professor X's face, and the hangover Professor X slowly opened his eyes. My king. After seeing Lancelot, Professor X suddenly became sober and said respectfully. Can I still use the brain wave strengthening device? Lancelot frowned and glanced at Professor X, then asked. I'm really sorry, my lord, Professor X was ashamed. His mental power had been declining for the past few years, and the influence of alcohol on the brain made him unable to control his mind freely. Psychic power. Especially recently, Professor X often dreams about some fragments of the future. In the dream, the world is devastated, and he is sitting in a wheelchair, with a face full of despair. Even this kind of despair, even after waking up from the dream, is still lingering, which makes Professor X full of guilt and fear of the future. Trash. Seeing Professor X's appearance, Lancelot snorted coldly, and then ignored Professor X. Hank, when Wolverine Logan shows up here, notify me immediately. Lancelot gave orders to Beast Hank, and then left Xavier Manor with Mystique Raven. My lord, will Wolverine Logan really go to Professor X? After leaving Xavier Manor, Mystique Raven asked with some doubts. In 1962, after the end of Mutant's first battle, Wolverine Logan left Xavier Manor alone after leaving with Professor X. For 8 years, even Lancelot couldn't find any trace of Wolverine Logan. Obviously, during these 8 years, he probably ran to an isolated island. Live the life of a beast. I will definitely go. Wolverine Logan is the key to reversing the future. Lancelot said confidently with a smile on the corner of his mouth. These years, Lancelot has been observing the future, and the only remaining mutants are ready to undergo consciousness time travel. Lancelot knows very well what this means, which means that the plot of Reverse Future is about to begin. However, what puzzled Lancelot was that he had been looking for Bolivar Trask for a long time, but he was still unable to find him. It was as if Trask had never been born. Because of this, Lancelot doesn't know whether the plot of reversing the future will usher in a change this time. My lord, Howard Stark has left New York. Just as Lancelot was thinking about reversing the future plot, Mystique Raven handed Lancelot a special communicator, and then Lancelot heard White Queen Emma's voice. Leaving New York at last. Lancelot smiled. In 1970, the New Jersey base of the Strategic Science Corps will welcome 2 old friends, Captain America Steve, who traveled from the future, and Iron Man Tony Stark, the son of Howard Stark. Therefore, Lancelot has always kept his people on Howard Stark, and now that Howard has left New York, it means that the future superheroes are coming soon. Emma, let's meet at the base in New Jersey. Lancelot ordered to the communication device, and then took Mystique Raven, teleported directly from New York to the base in New Jersey. Strategic Science Corps, inside the base in New Jersey. The director of the Strategic Science Corps, Peggy Carter, is currently concentrating on looking at the document in front of her, which is information about the Mutant Evolution House. After Lancelot bloodbathed the Academy of Strategic Sciences, Peggy Carter had already classified Lancelot and Mutant as absolute secrets. Quote. Peggy Carter. My research is finished. Just as Peggy Carter was looking at the document, a scientist with disheveled hair and wearing a scientific white coat rushed into Peggy Carter's office. Dr. Pym, calm down. Peggy Carter frowned and looked at Dr. Pym in front of her, but Peggy's advice obviously had no effect. Dr. Pym walked quickly in front of Peggy Carter, and placed a bottle of special liquid on Peggy Carter's desk with his right hand. Pym particles. I have finally developed Pym particles. With this kind of thing, my Ant-Man plan can be implemented to Li Jiao. Dr. Pym was really excited. Just a few days ago, he finally developed the Pym particle. Pym particles are a kind of very magical quantum particles. As long as Pym particles are injected into special combat uniforms, people can be shrunk down. Moreover, if we can continue to study in depth, Pym particles will become the door to open the quantum realm, and by then, he will change the world. Well, seal up the Pym particles. However, when Dr. Pym was so excited, Peggy Carter's words made Dr. Pym stunned. Waterfake. Dr. Pym couldn't believe his ears. What did he hear? This is a cross-age technology, and now Peggy Carter wants to seal it up. Dr. Pym, you heard me right. Pym particles are too dangerous and need to be stored on site. New Jersey Base, Strategic Science Corps. Lancelot appeared here with Mystique Raven. Looking at the huge base in the distance, Lancelot waited quietly. Without making Lancelot wait for a long time, a personnel carrier stopped in front of Lancelot, and White Queen Emma, who was wearing beautiful clothes, stepped out of the vehicle with enchanting steps. My king hail. Behind White Queen Emma, dozens of soldiers covered in camouflage stripes were waiting in line. This is one of the adaptive forces of the House of Mutant Evolution, the Stealth Force. The camouflage stripes on its body are taken from a mutant with chameleon genes. In special environments, these camouflage stripes can provide varying degrees of stealth. Let's go, find Dr. Pym. Lancelot brought White Queen Emma and Mystique Raven into this top-secret base like a stroll in the courtyard. As for the soldiers behind Lancelot, the camouflage stripes on their bodies shook for a while, and then they became transparent in the air. Stop, who are you? The fifth-level agent in charge of guarding the base, after seeing the three of Lancelot, immediately pulled out a pistol with his right hand and aimed the gun at Lancelot. Emma. Lancelot just glanced at these 5-level agents, and White Queen Emma behind her immediately put her right hand on her temple. Pong pong. Several agents in front of Lancelot fell to the ground, and Lancelot went directly into the base without even looking at these agents. This is a top-secret scientific research base, and the agents in the base are heavily guarded, almost every 3 steps, 1 post, 5 steps, 1 sentry. However, the defense of these agents is useless to the 3 of Lancelot. Inside the base, countless scientists belonging to the Strategic Science Corps are conducting various experiments in their respective laboratories. Fact Squid. In the underground laboratory at the core of the base, Dr. Pym was venting his anger angrily at the moment. Just now, his excitement about developing the Pym particles disappeared. As the director of the Strategic Science Corps, Peggy Carter actually asked him to seal up the Pym particles in his real room. Is that woman Peggy Carter crazy? This is the key that can open the door to the quantum realm. Dr. Pym angrily pushed down the experimental platform in front of him, full of resentment towards Peggy Carter and the Strategic Science Corps. Mary Falca. Dr. Pym was out of anger at this moment, and he cursed wildly, but then a strange idea suddenly appeared in his mind. Why don't I leave here and go to another place to continue my research? Dr. Pym's pupils shrank slightly, and he did as soon as he thought of it. Dr. Pym began to manufacture Pym particles non-stop. But Dr. Pym didn't see at all that in his laboratory, the 3 of Lancelot were leisurely flipping through Dr. Pym's research materials. Pym particles, which can scale down anything, is really an epic-making invention. Lancelot held a tube of pale yellow Pym particles in his hand. I couldn't help but praise. Just as Dr. Pym predicted, the Pym particles he developed really changed the world. At the time of the final battle in the future, the few remaining heroes of Avengers passed through the quantum world through Pym particles, and then went back to the past to collect the infinite rough stones of the past time and space. Pong. While Lancelot was observing the Pym particles, Dr. Pym's experiment was finally completed. He spent 10 hours manufacturing 4 tubes of Pym particles. Who are you? Until the research on Pym particles was completed, under the influence of the characteristics of Pym particles, Dr. Pym finally discovered the 3 of Lancelot and looked at the 3 of Lancelot who appeared in his laboratory. Pym the doctor's face changed drastically. Work for me forever. Lancelot cast a geas at Dr. Pym, taking one look at him. How could Lancelot let a talent like Dr. Pym, who could open the door to quantum time, pass? Mastering Pym particles is equivalent to mastering time travel. Of order. Dr. Pym only saw a fiery red bird flying out of Lancelot's eyes, and then Dr. Pym's will was rewritten, and he nodded respectfully to Lancelot. Invisible force, take Dr. Pym out of here. Lancelot ordered, and then the air began to twist. 2 invisible force soldiers appeared in front of Lancelot, and gently grabbed Dr. Pym's arm. As the 2 grabbed Dr. Pym's arm, Dr. Pym's body twisted suddenly, and then the whole body began to fade and disappear. A minute later, Dr. Pym disappeared in front of BFAH Sloat. Okay, let's wait for the future superheroes to arrive at this base. Lancelot glanced at Mystique Raven, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Swish. Mystique Raven suddenly turned into Dr. Pym, and Lancelot brought White Queen Emma to a computer. Vision. Lancelot pressed his right hand on his temple, using his consciousness to browse the confidential documents stored in this base. In 1978, the God Ego came to Earth. Quote, in 1987, Dr. Hank Pym invented the Ant-Man armor. Wasp sacrificed himself for a mission and got lost in the quantum realm. In 1988, Yondu, the Star Predator, was hired by the God Ego to come to Earth. Quote, in 1989, the Pegasus Project was born. Captain Marvel Carol Danvers, the Kree warships attacked. Quote, Lancelot's gaze became weird. He used his consciousness to search all the information on this base, and among the many information, he found some records about the future. Without a doubt, this is definitely the message of future Captain America. Lancelot mentally entered the network of the base again, and then found more information in the extremely hidden independent network. In 1970, the future Captain America and the future Iron Man arrived at the New Jersey base, and the Pym particles have now been sealed, waiting for the future superhero to take them away. Quote, the item has been extracted from the secret safe house and stored in the base storage in New Jersey, waiting for future heroes to pick it up. Quote, sure enough, everything has been arranged, including the transfer of Howard Stark, who is on vacation here, in advance. Lancelot put down his right hand, and a playful smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Sure enough, in 1970, there were 3 Captain Americas. A Hydra captain who was awakened early by the future Captain America, then frozen by himself in 1963, and refrozen. One is Captain America, who went back from the future to the end of World War II, completed the final battle, and prepared to retire in the past time and space. There is another one, Captain America, which is coming soon and is still experiencing the final battle. If you never look at it, the Endgame doesn't have any bugs. But from the timeline I'm in, Endgame is literally riddled with holes. Lancelot sneered. He urgently needs to confirm one thing now, that is whether his timeline will split after the arrival of the superhero in the future. After all, no matter where this group of future superheroes travels, time splitting will occur everywhere, and a time branch will be created because of the traveling of this group of superheroes. I hope that the time and space I live in won't be split. Lancelot's eyes were bright, and he quietly waited for the arrival of future superheroes. No matter what the result is, whether it will cause time division again, Lancelot is ready to meet this group of future superheroes in person. Now, just wait quietly. In 1970, time travel became inevitable. Lancelot took White Queen Emma and walked leisurely in the base of the Strategic Science Corps. He did not go to the unguarded storage warehouse. For Lancelot, the space Rubik's Cube was at his fingertips. 1970, New Jersey base. Howard Stark, an advisor to the Strategic Science Corps, ended his vacation with a confused face and came to this secret base. Peggy, you need to explain to me why you want to end my vacation. You know, my son was born this year. Howard Stark came to Peggy Carter's office and complained annoyed. After the birth of his son, Howard Stark's character became calmer, and he finally changed his playboy and arrogance. However, although the current Howard Stark is calmer, his words are still domineering, which is the pride of a super genius. Congratulations, Howard, your son is destined to become as great as you. Peggy Carter looked up at Howard Stark, and said sincerely. Thank you, Peggy. Hearing Peggy Carter praise his son so much, Howard Stark showed a proud fatherly smile on his face. Howard, what do you think about Evolution Glory Biological Company? Peggy Carter handed a document to Howard Stark, and then said in a solemn tone. Evolution Glory Biological Company. This is a biological company comparable to Stark Industries. The disease serum produced by this company has cured countless patients. Howard showed a smile on his face, and then looked at Peggy Carter. He knew that Peggy Carter must have some purpose in investigating Evolution Glory Bio Company. My agent recently infiltrated the Evolution Glory Company and discovered some problems. This is a biological company that provides support for mutant awakening. It holds a kind of serum-based serum that can turn on mutant genes in ordinary people. As long as there is an X variant gene in the body, injection of this serum will metamorphosis into a mutant. Peggy Carter said with a serious tone, frowning. In the past few years, Peggy Carter has been paying attention to Mutant's situation, but because the Mutant Evolution House is too mysterious, she can only focus on Evolution Glory Bio Company. I don't care about the matter of Mutant. Tell me, what are you planning to do when you call me this time? Howard Stark sat down on the table in front of Peggy Carter cynically, and asked absent-mindedly. I want you to study space. Tesseract. Peggy Carter tapped the table lightly, her face becoming extremely serious. Peggy, you really know something. How clever Howard was, he discovered some clues just from Peggy Carter's wrong words. You don't need to care about these, you just need to tell me whether we can open a portal through Tesseract. Peggy Carter's words made Howard Stark stunned. Portal, this is really a stupid idea. Tesseract has only opened one space teleportation so far. Howard's face was serious, and he couldn't help thinking scientifically. Peggy Carter definitely knew that Howard Stark was talking about the time the Tesseract teleported the Red Skull into deep space. And this is also the purpose of Peggy Carter. After she learned of the existence of Lancelot, the King of Mutants, she has been thinking about how to eliminate unknown threats like Lancelot, and thinking from 1962 until now, she finally found a way. Since the threat cannot be resolved, expel it. The reason for choosing now is that Peggy Carter knows that Tesseract at this time is one of the most active periods. Okay, Howard, I know you can do it. Peggy Carter couldn't help but lead Howard Stark into a high-energy cutting-edge laboratory. Dr. Pym, why are you here? However, just after entering the high-energy cutting-edge laboratory, Peggy Carter saw an unexpected person. Dr. Pym. Peggy Carter. You don't let me study Pym particles, but let Howard Stark study Tesseract. Dr. Pym in front of him glared at Peggy Carter, and then left the laboratory angrily. When Dr. Pym returned to his laboratory, his body suddenly changed like flowing water, and then turned into the appearance of Mystique Raven. My lord, Howard Stark has appeared, and Peggy Carter is going to let Howard continue to study Tesseract. Mystique Raven walked to Lancelot's side and reported. Emma, check Peggy Carter's thoughts. Lancelot ordered to White Queen Emma, and then White Queen Emma activated her spiritual power, instantly covering the entire base. My lord, Peggy Carter plans to send you into the deep space of the universe through Tesseract. A minute later, White Queen Emma had finished reading Peggy Carter's memory and detected Peggy Carter's purpose. Interesting, is this also a way to eliminate future threats? Lancelot's ruby eyes flickered, and he didn't know when he had grown into a future threat. At the same time, Lancelot also understood why Professor X said that he was lost in the deep space of the universe when Lancelot used the future eye to observe the future of Mutant. Peggy Carter, Tesseract. Lancelot tapped the table lightly, and then his eyes became unparalleled. Exactly, I want to try to see if I can devour the power of Space Gem. Lancelot exudes the spirit of a king. He has never been afraid of any challenge, especially in this special period of 1970. Don't bother with Howard Stark, let him study with peace of mind. Lancelot didn't intend to startle the snake. Lancelot doesn't want to cause complications until the future superhero crosses over. A month passed quietly. In Howard Stark's cutting-edge laboratory, on top of a huge amounts of machines at the moment, Tesseract is exuding violent fluctuations. What's going on? Howard Stark had never seen such a violent Tesseract fluctuation, and he looked at the assistant beside him. Doctor, the energy level of Tesseract is increasing geometrically, and the specific reason is unknown. The science assistant looked at the violently fluctuating Tesseract in front of him in horror, and then spoke. Is the energy transmission stable? Howard Stark quickly came to the machine, and then began to debug the equipment. This is the shuttle device that Howard Stark spent a month developing. By extracting the explosion of Tesseract space energy, a space crack is opened. In this day and age, that's the limit. The energy transmission is stabilizing now. Doctor, do you want to terminate the energy input? The assistant looked at the machine equipment in front of him with fear, and felt anxious for a while. Sometimes, you have to learn to run before you learn to walk. Scientific research is originally accompanied by risks, and scientists want to transform risks into results. Howard Stark was unmoved, and even excited. Tesseract's energy fluctuations just gave Howard Stark some inspiration. And while Howard Stark was still diligently debugging the machine, within the base, 2 clusters of quantum light spots flew out of the void, and then rapidly expanded. 2 future superheroes wearing white quantum shuttle suits have finally arrived. Rumble. And at the moment when these 2 future heroes arrived, Lancelot opened his eyes, and Lancelot's future eyes opened automatically. 2 different futures roll in front of Lancelot. Sure enough, the timeline is split. Lancelot's face was livid, and his future eyes began to show 2 different futures uncontrollably. Chapter 71. Click. At the base in New Jersey, a slight sound of time and space splitting sounded, and then 2 figures wearing futuristic white quantum battle suits appeared in the base in New Jersey. From 2023, Captain America Steve Rogers of Endgame and Captain America Steve Rogers' nemesis, Iron Man Tony Stark. Hey, Captain, you need to know that if we can't find Pym particles, we will be trapped in the past time and space. Iron Man Tony Stark is as arrogant as ever, as cynical as Howard Stark when he was young, even there is still more than that. Even if half of the life in the universe has been destroyed, it still can't make him change his bad mouth. Don't worry, there must be Pym particles and Tesseract here. Nick Fury told me that. Captain America Steve Rogers turned his head and glanced at Iron Man Tony Stark, and said calmly. Wait, Captain, I suddenly thought of a question. 017. Iron Man Tony Stark activated the invisible force field on the nanosteel battlesuit, and suddenly looked at Captain America Steve with a serious expression. Rogers. Quote question mark question mark question mark quote. Looking at Tony Stark, who was so serious, Captain America Rogers couldn't help but look serious even though he was confused. Suppose we gathered the infinite gems and started to snap our fingers. At this time, a very serious problem occurred. Tony Stark made an exaggerated gesture of snapping his fingers while speaking. So, do we resurrect all the people on Earth that were killed by Thanos' snap of his fingers, or should we just restore the entire universe that died because of Thanos? Life. Tony Stark looked at Captain America Rogers, and Tony's words made Captain America fall into silence. We are the superheroes of the Earth, and the universe is not under our jurisdiction. Captain America Rogers shrugged and said his answer. Oh, what a ruthless and selfless Captain Earth. Look, this is the price of playing with time. We are not willing to fail, but we don't save lives on other planets. So, I came to a conclusion. If the Earth is finished, will the universe be peaceful? Maybe the purple sweet potato essence is right. The only thing that is wrong is that it is too kind and allows half of the life on the Earth to survive. Tony Stark is still in the non-stop poisonous tongue, but this time Captain America Rogers is a rare silence. In fact, the original purpose of executing this time travel plan was to save the dead on Earth. As for other lives in the universe, just as Captain America said, they are just superheroes on Earth, and life on other planets has nothing to do with it. What are they doing? And when Captain America was silent, and Tony Stark was still chattering about the stupid plan of this time travel, he was in Dr. Pym's laboratory at the base. Lancelot's future eye at the moment went berserk. At this moment, in Lancelot's eyes, two different futures appeared, and everything split from 1970. In the future on the left, everything is business as usual, the House of Mutant Evolution is flourishing, White Queen Emma and other mutants still exist. No crisis, business as usual. However, the future on the right is quite the opposite. In 1970, Lancelot, the king of mutants, disappeared into the deep space of the universe, and the entire evolutionary family of mutants was leaderless. In 1971, the U.S. Army raided the House of Mutant Evolution, and the mutants inside suffered heavy casualties. Various mutants were captured by humans, including White Queen Emma, Black Emperor Shao, Red Devil Asazo, Torrent Quest, and Kraken West. Well, wait. In this year, Mystique Raven embarked on a journey to find Lancelot, the king of mutants, alone. In 1972, the mutant situation took a turn for the worse, and all over the country began to frantically arrest Mutant, and the mutant family returned to the point where everyone shouted and beat them again. The Trask Industrial Group was established. Bolivar Trask began to put the Sentry Plan on the agenda, and after losing the deterrence of the mutant evolutionary home, Trask began to hunt down Mutant. In 1973, the first generation of Sentry came out, and at the same time the mutants began to travel back in time without Lancelot. In 1979, Wolverine Logan was captured by Colonel Wilhelm Stryker, and then implanted with adamantium, achieving Wolverine. In 2005, Wolverine Logan met Little Rascal, went to the Xavier Talent Academy, and joined the X-Men founded by Professor X, the leader of Mutant at the time. Another leader of Mutant, Magneto Eric, has always believed in the theory of mutant glory, leading the Mutant Brotherhood to fight with humans. In 2006, the future moved forward to X-Men 2, Magneto was released from prison, Professor X was controlled, and Phoenix was buried at the bottom of the lake. In 2007, Phoenix returned from the resurrection and started the third X-Men battle. The future of Lancelot's right eye was constantly advancing, stretching from 1970 until 2013, when the Trask Industries Group began mass production of the second-generation Sentry. In the next 10 years, Mutant ushered in a real doomsday, and the Sentry crisis broke out in full swing. Sure enough, a time branch appeared in the timeline because the two Iron Man from the future traveled through. Lancelot's future eye was still running wild, and he saw everything about Mutant. When an hour later, Lancelot's eyes closed and everything seemed to be back to normal. But only Lancelot knows that he is standing in another split timeline in 1970. In this split timeline, the evolutionary family of Mutant fell apart, and all his subordinates disappeared. White Queen Emma, Mystique Raven. In this new timeline, there are no White Queen Emma, Black Emperor Shao, Red Devil Azazo, and the Mutant Legion cultivated by Lancelot. Not only that, in this timeline, the evolutionary Glory Biotechnology company established by Lancelot no longer exists. And Lancelot's future eyes have also changed. He can see the future of two different timelines. On the normal timeline, Lancelot disappeared, and White Queen Emma launched her spiritual power to sweep the entire New Jersey base, but found nothing. In desperation, White Queen Emma left the base with Mystique Raven, returned to the mutant evolution home in Siberia, and waited for Lancelot's return. Reversing the future. Lancelot's pupils constricted constantly at this moment, and he was convinced that he had indeed been repelled by the timeline into the universe of reversing the future. In this time and space, in 1973, the future mutants will open the time and space channel and send Wolverine Logan's consciousness back. As for returning to the normal time and space, or this time and space in 1973, Lancelot needs to confirm. Crash. Just when Lancelot was thinking about the splitting of the timeline, a group of agents quickly broke into Dr. Pym's laboratory, and the guns were instantly pointed at Lancelot. Oh, because of the lack of White Queen Emma's spiritual shield in this time and space, did you find me? Lancelot looked at the agent in front of him with interest, and then Zigwang became invincible. Cub, kneel down. Lancelot activated Gios directly, and the agent standing in front of Lancelot immediately knelt in front of Lancelot without any resistance. Who gave you the courage to point a gun at a mutant king? Lancelot was furious at the moment, and his tone was cold. The split of time made him surprised, but not panicked. But the future of his timeline makes Lancelot angry. Go and get rid of the culprit of this time split first. Lancelot tidied up his clothes, and then walked out of the laboratory calmly. Stop. Who are you? In the wide corridor of the base in New Jersey, a group of heavily armed soldiers were waiting in line at the moment. On the opposite side of this group of soldiers is Lancelot, who is expressionless. Fire! Fire! Inside the base, Peggy Carter was staring at the screen in front of her with a serious face, and then directly gave the order to fire. Lancelot, why is he here? At this moment, Peggy Carter's face was serious, and no one here knew the king of Mutant better than her. Just relying on language alone, Lancelot slaughtered the entire Institute of Strategic Technology, and almost broke the talent pool of the Scientific Strategic Corps. Therefore, after discovering that it was Lancelot who invaded the base, Pia Carter didn't give Lancelot a chance to speak at all. Under Peggy Carter's order, hundreds of soldiers directly pulled the trigger, and countless bullets instantly turned into a bullet storm, enveloping Lancelot. Energy absorption. However, facing the bullet storm of the Strategic Science Corps agent, Lancelot just stood proudly and let the bullet hit his body. And all the bullets, after hitting Lancelot's body, lost 15% of their kinetic energy, and the densely packed bullets all fell to the ground. Garbage. Glancing at the densely packed bullets on the ground, Lancelot raised his right hand, and the absorbed energy instantly turned into an energy ray, sweeping away all the soldiers. Rumble. Huge amounts of explosions sounded one after another, and all the soldiers were blown away by Lancelot's energy rays. But Lancelot didn't even look at the explosion in front of him. His whole body instantly turned into a cloud of red mist and disappeared into the corridor. The sudden explosion also alarmed Captain America Rogers and Iron Man Tony Stark, who had been searching for Pym particles and Tesseract in the base. What's going on? I didn't hear that someone attacked the base in 1970. Tony Stark glanced at Captain America Rogers, and then the nano armor on his body immediately covered his whole body. I don't know. Anyway, it's absolutely impossible for the attacker to be an alien. Captain America Rogers shrugged and said jokingly. Pong. When the two future superheroes looked at each other, not knowing what happened, a cloud of red mist flickered opposite them, and then Lancelot appeared in front of Iron Man Tony Stark and Captain America Rogers. Fack, who are you? The sudden appearance of Lancelot startled the two of them. Iron Man Tony Stark instantly entered the fighting state, and the Iron Man battle armor turned on the fighting mode. Vision hyphenation point imprisonment. However, Lancelot just glanced at Tony Stark, his mind became electronic instantly, and he took control of the Iron Man armor in an instant, and imprisoned Tony Stark in the armor. What fack? What the hell is this? Tony Stark from the future was shocked and lost his Iron Man armor, which made Tony lose his fighting power in an instant. Although I don't know who you are, let's subdue you first. Captain America Rogers quickly rushed towards Lancelot with a shield in his hand as if facing a formidable enemy. Cub, I don't have time to play with you, Gios. Lancelot's eyes were cold. He had no time to waste on the future Captain America. Therefore, he directly launched Gios, and Lancelot tried to directly control the future Captain America, but failed. Obviously, Captain America's tenacity and indomitable spirit can defend against Gios' absolute orders to a certain extent. Therefore, Lancelot could only settle for the next best thing, and issued another order to Captain America. Sleep. Following Lancelot's order, Captain America Rogers fell to the ground and fell into a deep sleep. Follow me. Lancelot gave Captain America Rogers a cold look, and then used his vision to digitize his mind to control Iron Man Tony Stark's steel armor and move forward. Hey, this unknown gentleman, where are you going to take me? Iron Man Tony Stark was still chattering while his body was imprisoned in the battle suit. Fire. As Lancelot moved forward, a group of soldiers blocked Lancelot's footsteps. These soldiers had obviously already received orders, and they would choose to fire whenever they encountered Lancelot. Stop breathing. Lancelot let the bullet hit him like a tickle, and then he gave an absolute order indifferently. Crash. All the soldiers collapsed to the ground, clutching their necks with their hands and struggling in pain. Fack, Lancelot is coming this way. At this moment, in Howard Stark's high-energy cutting-edge laboratory, Peggy Carter looked at the monitor in front of her with a gloomy expression. She originally thought that Lancelot would fall into a fierce battle after meeting the future Captain and future Iron Man, but she never expected that Lancelot would kill Captain America so easily and control Iron Man's armor. Peggy, what should we do? Although Howard Stark was asking Peggy Carter, his eyes were on the steel armor behind Lancelot. Turn on the Tesseract and send the King of Mutants to the deep space of the universe. Peggy Carter had already planned everything. Following Peggy Carter's order, Howard Stark began to debug the machine, and the Tesseract on the machine was bursting out with powerful energy fluctuations at this moment. Pong! Just as Howard Stark was manipulating the machine, a puff of red smoke appeared in the laboratory, and then Lancelot walked out with a steel armor. Get the Tesseract back for me. Lancelot manipulated the steel battlesuit and walked towards the Tesseract through visual perception and digitalization of the mind. Click. Lancelot controlled the steel battlesuit and easily took the Tesseract off the machine. Looking at the blue Tesseract in front of him, Lancelot showed a smile on his face. After learning that the timeline split, his original goal was the Tesseract in front of him. Lancelot knows very well that the only force that can make him leave this time branch is the Tesseract space portal. Energy absorption. Lancelot's right hand lightly touched the Tesseract, and then began to absorb the power of the Tesseract crazily. Boom! In just an instant, huge space energy has filled every cell of Lancelot. The berserk energy reached the energy limit that Lancelot could absorb almost instantly. The Eye of Sharjah. Lancelot instantly opened his Eye of Sharjah, sealing all the space energy in his body into his eyes. Swish! And as Lancelot continued to seal the space energy, Tesseract burst out a terrifying beam of energy light suddenly. Lancelot, who was the first to bear the brunt, was wrapped in energy before he even had time to absorb it. Lancelot only felt that the world in front of him was advancing rapidly, and his body, wrapped in Tesseract, disappeared in the New Jersey base in an instant. When Lancelot opened his eyes again, he had already appeared in a lake. Vision. Lancelot stood up from the lake, then pressed his right hand on his temple, and his mind electronically connected to the satellite above his head in an instant. In 1973, it was actually teleported to New York in 1973 by the Tesseract. Unfortunately, it didn't return to the correct timeline. Lancelot's eyes flickered, and he smiled wryly. Although he absorbed the power of Space Gem as planned, he still didn't return to the correct timeline. The current time is 197 years from the future timeline. Boom! In the lake on the outskirts of New York, a ball of golden energy soared into the sky, and then the golden energy flickered and disappeared into the sky. New York, Xavier Estate. The Xavier Manor at this moment is extremely desolate, and Professor X, who is located in the Xavier Manor, is sitting in a wheelchair in extreme pain. Hank. Professor X's painful face was distorted, and he called out to Beast Hank anxiously. In the timeline of reversing the future, Professor X got a rare virus in 1970, which caused his legs to be paralyzed, and lost the recovery potion of the mutant evolution house, so he could only spend time in a wheelchair. 3 years have passed. Professor, are you sick again? Beast Hank came striding forward, his eyes filled with deep silence. In this timeline, Lancelot disappeared, and the entire mutant evolutionary family was leaderless and fell apart. And Beast Hank, as a member of the former mutant evolution house, was also deeply affected and became devastated. Ahem, medicine, painkiller. Professor X yelled in pain. His mental state was extremely unstable, and an unknown virus tormented his nerves, making him unable to concentrate, let alone use his spiritual power. Beast Hank injected Professor X with a painkiller with a blank face, then Beast Hank sat on the steps and started to stare blankly. Hank, how is Mutant's situation now? Professor X calmed down after injecting painkillers. He glanced at Beast Hank, and then asked. Too bad, the Trask industry has already begun to hunt down mutants. Beast Hank glanced at Professor X, and then hesitated to speak. I know what you mean, Hank. You want me to stand up, find King Lancelot, and rebuild the House of Mutant Evolution. Professor X glanced at Beast Hank, and spoke out what Beast Hank wanted. The moment my king disappeared, you should stand up. Your brain wave strengthening machine can control the human beings all over the world. Beast Hank became extremely emotional. In the past 3 years, he has asked the professor more than once. X uses the brain wave strengthening machine to find Lancelot, and even erase all human malice towards Mutant. But without exception, Teacher X rejected them all. I'm sorry, Hank. Professor X glanced at Beast Hank guiltily, and said, Professor, you shouldn't apologize to me, you should apologize to all mutant colleagues who died because of this. Beast Hank made no secret of his disappointment with Professor X. In 3 years, even the Black Emperor Shao, White Queen Emma and others of the mutant evolution house died. The powerful mutants disappeared one by one, and the newly born mutants, because of the lack of mutant growth hormones and X-gene stabilizers, often lost control of their mutant ability, so they were once again regarded as monsters and freaks by all humans. Mutant has once again become an outlier among human beings, and was arrested wantonly like a commodity, and turned into a laboratory mouse to be dissected and studied by human beings. I'm sorry. Hearing Beast Hank tell the tragic experience of the new generation mutant, Professor X closed his eyes again in pain and guilt. Excuse me, is Professor X there? Just as Professor X and Beast Hank fell silent at the same time, a familiar voice made them look around. A burly man with whiskers came over with a cigar in his mouth. Wolverine Logan. Beast Hank frowned slightly, his body turned into a blue-haired gorilla, and instantly rushed towards Wolverine Logan. Hey, calm down. Wolverine Logan, who had just traveled from the future, was taken aback, and then stretched out her bone claws with both hands to defend herself. Boom! Beast Hank roared angrily, and then directly threw Wolverine Logan to the ground, and his sharp claws were directly embedded in Wolverine Logan's shoulder. Roar! With huge amounts of pain, Wolverine Logan roared angrily, and then threw Beast Hank flying with force. Wolverine Logan, why did you appear here if you didn't look for my king? Beast Hank looked at Wolverine Logan angrily, and what he said made Wolverine, who came from the future, look puzzled. Hey, what are you talking about? Also, you are Beast Hank, it's been a long time. Well, it's been many years since you died. Wolverine Logan glanced at Beast Hank, and said familiarly, say hello. Huh, Beast Hank froze for a moment, he glanced at Professor X, and Professor X immediately understood. The Logan in front of him has lost a lot of memory, he doesn't remember the evolution home of Mutant. Professor X put down his right hand wearily, the previous telepathy was all he could do. Mutant Evolution House. What is that? Wolverine Logan glanced at Professor X suspiciously, and then began to introduce himself. Professor, we meet again, you are much more handsome in the past than in the future. Wolverine Logan sat in front of Professor X, then said with a chuckle. And then Wolverine Logan began to tell about future Sentry crises, and future mutant encounters. Sentry crisis. Teslac. Beast Hank and Professor X looked at each other, they looked at Wolverine Logan in disbelief, feeling that there was a huge amount of information. HMPH, if my king exists, how could there be any Sentry crisis? Beast Hank snorted coldly, and then left here. My king, who is that? Sorry, Professor, there will be no such person in the future. Wolverine Logan looked at Professor X with a puzzled face. He was very interested in the king that Beast Hank spoke of. My king, Lancelot, is the king of Mutant, but 3 years ago, my king suddenly disappeared. Professor X explained, and then looked at Wolverine Logan with a frown. Quote, you said you came from the future, and the future Sentry was built according to Mystique's genes. Quote, is it possible to stop this future crisis as long as we find Mystique Raven? Professor X asked. He used telepathy to check the future experienced by Wolverine Logan again. That's a hopeless future. Professor X is ready to prevent such a future, and according to Wolverine Logan's information, the key to preventing the future lies in Mystique Raven. Yes, Professor, just find Mystique Raven, and we can end the future. Wolverine Logan spoke the future professor's words. It's really ridiculous, the Sentry crisis is obviously caused by humans, and it means to attack your own mutant comrades. Professor X, is this the justice you uphold? A cold and mocking voice sounded in the ears of Professor X and Wolverine Logan, and then a cloud of red smoke appeared in front of them. Lancelot stepped out of the smoke. My king. Professor X looked at Lancelot in surprise, and his face was complicated for a while. Compared to Professor X's surprise, Wolverine Logan, who had never obtained Zhao's time travel, looked at Lancelot with vigilance. Kneel down. Looking at Wolverine Logan who was looking at him vigilantly, Lancelot frowned slightly, and then directly gave Gios instructions. Pong. Wolverine Logan only felt dazed for a moment, then knelt directly in front of Lancelot. What's going on here? Wolverine Logan, who traveled from the future, didn't know why this happened. He just looked at Lancelot in horror, and then Wolverine Logan's consciousness went into a trance, and he returned to the future. Hank, prepare a quiet room for me. I'm going to draw a lottery. Lancelot ordered, without looking at Wolverine Logan, to Beast Hank, who was looking at him in surprise. Of order, my king. Beast Hank was so excited that he looked at Lancelot standing in front of Wolverine Logan frantically, and was overwhelmed with surprise for a moment. Reverse the future timeline, 1973. Lancelot, led by Beast Hank, entered a quiet room. At this moment, Beast Hank was so excited that he couldn't believe his eyes. My king is back. Beast Hank has been waiting for Lancelot's return for 3 years. No, not just Beast Hank, almost all mutants are waiting for Lancelot's return. My lord, please save the mutant family. The excited Beast Hank knelt down on one knee in front of Lancelot, begging sadly. In the past 3 years, Mutant was almost like a rat crossing the street, without the glory of the mutant evolution house led by Lancelot. This wrong timeline, let me destroy it. Lancelot looked at Beast Hank calmly, and his voice became dignified. For Lancelot, there is no need for Mutant to reverse the future. He wants to essentially destroy both the present and the future of this timeline at the same time. Hank, you go down first. Lancelot waved Beast Hank to leave, and at the same time Lancelot opened the future eye directly. Boom. In the world in front of me, there are 2 different futures again. On the left is a smooth transition to the future of Mutant's evolutionary home in 1973. On the right, it has been going on for decades and is experiencing the Sentry Crisis in 2023. And now in 2023, when the future is reversed, the surviving mutants are on a cliff. Countless sentinels are coming towards them, and the 240-year-old Magneto is manipulating a huge metal group and is struggling to resist the impact of Sentry. And in the building behind Magneto, Shadowcat Katie is transmitting Wolverine Logan's consciousness to the past through her own ability. The future is already in jeopardy. Lancelot's eyes were indifferent, and the branch of time in front of him was already in jeopardy. Although Lancelot can let the future be shattered, once the future really disappears, I'm afraid Lancelot will be completely trapped in this timeline. Anyway, let's do the pupil art lottery first. Lancelot took a deep breath, and then closed his eyes. System, let's draw a god-level pupil technique. Lancelot directly issued an order to the system. And following Lancelot's order, he started the first god-level pupil lottery draw since time travel. Ding! It is detected that there are 7 chances to draw a lottery with the god-level pupil technique, whether to use the god-level pupil technique once to draw a lottery. The system's beep sounded in Lancelot's ear. Before I knew it, I had accumulated 7 lucky draw chances. Lancelot sighed, and then directly started the first lucky draw for god-level pupil art. The lottery draw for the god-level pupil technique has begun, and the lottery has been completed. Quote, congratulations to the host for obtaining the god-level pupil technique, Reincarnation Eye. Quote, boom. Lancelot only felt a slight tingling in his pupils, and then 6 concentric circles appeared in his ruby-like pupils BFAH. The white concentric circles match Lancelot's red pupils, making Lancelot's eyes look more mysterious. The Eye of Reincarnation, from Naruto, is called the Eye of the Immortal. The reincarnation eyes are divided into Nagato's 6 reincarnation eyes, Uchiha Madara's Jugoyu reincarnation eyes, and what Lancelot draws is the Uzumaki Nagato's 6 reincarnation eyes. Its eyes of reincarnation have the ability of the 6 realms, and because of the terrifying power of the eyes of reincarnation, Uzumaki Nagato is also called the God of Pain. Reincarnation Eye. Excitement appeared on Lancelot's face. He just wanted to destroy this wrong timeline, and the extracted reincarnation eye just happened to allow Lancelot to perfectly implement his plan. Base. Lancelot raised his hand, and a black stick condensed in the palm of his right hand. This black stick has the ability to transmit the power of Lancelot's reincarnation eye. Not only that, this black stick can also create 6 duplications. Lancelot stood up, and then walked out of the quiet room. In Professor X's room, Wolverine Logan was still kneeling. Professor X, what's going on here? Wolverine Logan from the future didn't know what happened, he could only look for help to Professor X, who was slumped in a wheelchair. Give up struggling, Logan. This is my king's absolute order, don't mention you, even I am powerless to resist. Professor X smiled wryly, and began to admonish him. At this moment, Professor X has mixed emotions in his heart. He did not expect that Lancelot, who had disappeared for 3 years, would appear. Although he doesn't know why Lancelot disappeared, Professor X knows that the return of Lancelot will definitely set off a bloodbath. The end of mankind is coming. Absolute order. Wolverine Logan was terrified. In the future, he was in a state of amnesia. He had forgotten everything about the past, and he also forgot the horror of Lancelot. Professor X, find me the trail of Mystique Raven. When Wolverine Logan fell into fear, Lancelot also appeared in Professor X's room at the same time. I'm really sorry, my lord. I can't use the brain-wave strengthening machine anymore. Hearing Lancelot's order, Professor Fierce said with guilt on his face. Trash. Lancelot gave Professor X a cold look, and then walked directly in front of Professor X. The way of the world. Boom. Professor X only felt that his mind was in a trance for a while, and then he saw a pair of huge amounts of 6 circle eyes, and at the same time, he felt an incomparably terrifying consciousness instantly occupying his brain. Reincarnation Eye Human Tao possesses the power of spiritual invasion of the brain, similar to Professor X's telepathy, but even more powerful than telepathy. Reading the memory and extracting the soul is nothing but leisure. Professor X only felt dazed for a moment, and then his eyes turned into Lancelot's reincarnation eyes. Lancelot occupied Professor X's brain through one of the 6 realms of reincarnation eye, and then Lancelot brought Professor X to the Ash's brainwave strengthening room. Controlling Professor X's hands, he put on the brainwave strengthening machine, and then Lancelot directly activated the telepathy power of Professor X. Boom. At this moment, Lancelot seemed to be everywhere. The human consciousness of the whole world is presented in front of Lancelot. At this moment, Lancelot seemed to be in the starry sky of the universe, with countless light spots flashing in front of Lancelot. Even with the spiritual power of the human world, he couldn't help being a little slow. Raven. Lancelot manipulated Professor X to concentrate slightly, and then the picture in front of him began to flicker constantly. Trask Industrial Building. Lancelot withdrew his human powers and Professor X slumped to the ground in an instant. Lancelot just glanced at Professor X indifferently, then opened his right hand, and a black stick appeared in Lancelot's hand. Laugh. Lancelot casually stabbed the black stick into Professor X's shoulder, and Professor X, who was howling in pain, suddenly fell silent. Be my way of life. Lancelot's pupil reincarnation eyes slightly dilated, and then the power of the reincarnation eyes was instantly transmitted to Professor X's body through the black stick. In just an instant, the eyes of Teacher X turned into the same reincarnation eyes like Lancelot. At the same time, Professor X felt that there was a new kind of power in his body, which was more terrifying than telepathy. The way of the world. Professor X's eyes are cold and heartless, and at this moment he has been transformed into one of the 6 puppets by Lancelot's reincarnation eyes. The eyes of reincarnation can not only manipulate corpses to form 6 puppets, as long as the black stick is pierced into the body, even if it is a living person, the eyes of reincarnation can be manipulated at will. Let's go, I want to make this world feel the pain. Lancelot glanced at Professor X, and then Professor X stood up immediately. The power of the human world covers Professor X's consciousness and controls Professor X's body at the same time. New York, Trask Industrial Building. Mystique Raven incarnated as a staff member and sneaked in here. She came here to find news about her King Lancelot. According to intelligence, Lancelot's disappearance is inseparable from the strategic science core behind the Trask Industrial Building. My lord, where are you? Mystique Raven looked angrily at the magnificent mansion in front of her, where her mutant comrade was buried. For 3 years, she has been searching for Lancelot's whereabouts, and even at the risk of her own life, she sneaked into the research institute of Trask Industry many times to search for Lancelot's trace, but found nothing. However, although Raven did not find any trace of Lancelot, he discovered that this world is somewhat special. There is no Stark Industrial Building in this world, and there is no Captain America Steve Rogers. It seems that overnight, everything that Raven knows has disappeared. Instead, it seems that only humans and mutants are left in the whole world. Magneto, what's the situation on your side? Raven opened his own communicator while searching for the mutant file in Trask Industry, and asked. The Sentry factory has already begun to produce Sentry in all aspects. And the material of these sentry is special, I can't control it through the variant ability. Raven's earphones sounded, Magneto's voice. At this moment, Magneto is leading the Toad people and is monitoring a secret sentry factory. At this moment, Sentry has changed from the first generation of metamorphosis to the second generation of Sentry. The whole body is made of special materials, which can detect the X gene in the mutant body, and can release a special energy-based attack. Pong. While Raven was listening to Magneto's report on the Sentry factory, a cloud of red mist appeared in the lobby of the Trask Industrial Building. Then Lancelot appeared here with his own way of life, Professor X. It's a mutant. Notify Dr. Trask immediately. Soldier, soldier. The sudden appearance of Lancelot and Professor X made all the scientists and soldiers in the building tense up, and groups of soldiers quickly surrounded Lancelot and the two of them. On the top floor of the Trask building, Bolivar Trask was sitting in his office at the moment, looking indifferently at Lancelot, who suddenly appeared. Another mutant is coming, let the sentry go out. Trask, who was only 1.5 meters tall, picked up the phone on the table, and then gave the order. Raven, long time no see. Lancelot ignored the soldiers around him, he strode towards a staff member and said with a light smile. My king. Raven looked at Lancelot in surprise, and then his whole body instantly turned into blue skin. After 3 years of absence, Raven's figure became even more outstanding and hot. Raven hugged Lancelot directly in surprise, expressing his missing with a passionate kiss, and after being excited, Raven finally saw Lancelot's eyes. My lord, your eyes, is this a new mutant ability? Raven saw Lancelot's eyes, the 6 circle eyes are so mysterious and handsome. Definitely, as you can see. This is my new ability, the Eye of Reincarnation, the eye that controls life and death. Lancelot gently pulled Raven into his arms, and then looked at the opposite side with unparalleled eyes. Countless soldiers are waiting in formation at this moment. In their hands, they hold a special weapon. This weapon is not made of metal, but is similar to a plastic weapon. Obviously, these weapons are to guard against Magneto's metal control. Fire. A heavily armed captain issued an order, and then all the soldiers fired, and countless energy bullets enveloped Lancelot in an instant. Hungry Ghost Path Absorption. Faced with these energy bullets, Lancelot just opened his right hand indifferently, releasing the ability of the Hungry Ghost Path in Samsara Eye. All the energy bullets were sucked into Lancelot's body in an instant. Hungry Ghost's ability is similar to Hai Wangshao's energy absorbing, but it is even more powerful, and it can absorb energy through space, and not only energy, vitality, and soul power, mutated energy, etc., can be absorbed by the Hungry Ghost Dao. Shenluo Tianzhang. Lancelot's pupil reincarnation burst out a violent repulsive force. The repulsive force spread out in all directions, centered on Lancelot like a tide. The group of soldiers who bore the brunt were instantly turned into powder under the repulsion force, and their entire bodies were blown away by the wind like sand. Rumble. Then the entire Trask building, everything was turned into dust in an instant, swept away by the repulsive force released by Lancelot. Destroyed. The skeleton of the building made of special alloy is as fragile as tofu dregs at the moment. Looking from a high altitude, a deep pit appeared in the original location of the building in an instant. And the deep pit is still pushing horizontally quickly. Where the repulsive force passes, the surrounding buildings disintegrate instantly, as if the world is destroyed. Everything, under the repulsive force, begins to drift with the wind. When Lancelot stopped releasing the Reincarnation Eye ability, everything within 10 kilometers of Feng Yuan was gone, as if it had been erased by some kind of force. Is this really a mutant? Trask, who had seen the situation was not good and was hiding in the underground secret base, was full of horror at the moment. He had never seen such a terrifying mutant ability. Even when facing He Huangshao, he had never been so surprised before. Quick, get Sentry out. Trask was in a state of panic. He quickly pressed a button, and then under the ground, sentinels burst out of the ground one by one. Wanxiang Tianian. Lancelot turned a blind eye to these sentinels, and opened his right hand, aiming at the secret base where Trask was. Rumble. At this moment, under the terrifying gravity of Lancelot, the huge secret base instantly broke away from the original base, rose from the ground at an extremely terrifying speed, and floated into the midair. Lancelot waved his right hand slightly, like the gravitational force of the tide, easily tearing the base into pieces. The entire base began to disintegrate in an instant, and countless scientific researchers fell in front of Lancelot like dumplings. Bolivar Trask. Feel the pain. Lancelot walked in front of Bolivar Trask with indifferent eyes, and then pressed his right hand on the center of Trask's head. The way of the world's soul extraction. Lancelot raised his right hand and instantly extracted Trask's soul. And as Lancelot pulled Trask's soul out, the whole world began to shake wildly. This split timeline has become extremely unstable. Above the sky where Lancelot is, the Sentinel, which was originally only one generation, has turned into a future second-generation Sentinel. Because I killed Trask, did this timeline that reverses the future finally begin to connect to the future? Lancelot watched with interest the changes in the Sentinel in the sky, and then his whole body gradually floated into the air. From now on, let the world feel the pain. The timeline in front of me is no longer necessary. Warning, warning, the death of Bolivar Trask is detected, the ultimate mode of sentry is turned on, and the ability is shared. Reversing the future timeline. In 2023, as Lancelot killed Trask in 1973, the program originally set inside Sentry began to start. Sentry, who absorbed the power of countless mutants, began to pass on the ability he absorbed to 1973 through a special mutant ability. What's going on? What happened? In the future mutants' last base, Professor X and Magneto looked at each other. They didn't know what happened. They only saw countless Sentry fading away like a tide, and the transport plane that originally transported the Sentry also disappeared. Quickly, wake up Wolverine Logan. Unknown Professor X immediately notified Shadowcat Katie, temporarily wake up Wolverine Logan. Yes, Professor X. Shadowcat Katie nodded, and then wiped the sweat on her forehead. Her ability was originally able to pass through objects, but originally she could only pass through walls. With the development of Shadowcat, she is now able to pass through consciousness, penetrates the timeline, 320, and is sent back to the past. Right now, she is using her ability to pull back the consciousness of Wolverine Logan sent to 1973. My King Hail. When Shadowcat Katie took her hands away from Wolverine Logan's temples, Wolverine Logan, who was sleeping, suddenly opened his eyes, and he let out a wild cry. Then Wolverine Logan came back to his senses. He looked around in a daze, stared blankly for 5 minutes, and finally returned to normal thinking. I saw Lancelot, King of Mutants in the past time and space. Wolverine Logan's words made the two future mutant leaders startled. Swish. Magneto directly opened his right hand, and Wolverine Logan's body flew uncontrollably in front of Magneto. At this moment, Magneto looked at Wolverine Logan excitedly. What did you say? Did you see my King Lancelot? Magneto asked incredulously. Yes, that's what he calls himself. Wolverine Logan wanted to shrug, but found that his body was being controlled by Magneto, and he couldn't move at all. This is the downside of Wolverine Logan's replacement of the skeleton with adamantium. Telepathy. Even Professor X was very excited at this moment. Without Wolverine Logan's permission, he started to read Wolverine Logan's memory using his spiritual power. Scenes of the past appeared in front of Professor X. When he saw Lancelot appearing from the red mist, the aged Professor X couldn't help but burst into tears. My King Lancelot. Mutant is saved. Professor X couldn't help but shouted frantically. He saw Lancelot and Lancelot's reincarnation eyes through Wolverine Logan's memory. Just seeing those eyes, Professor X felt a palpitation, as if he was directly pierced into the soul. Bolivar Trask is dead. Why does Sentry still exist? After being excited, Professor X couldn't help but have a doubt. Trask has been killed by Lancelot, why his future has not changed? Continue to send Wolverine Logan back and tell my king that the future of our mutant has not changed. Professor X glanced at Wolverine Logan and felt that it was necessary to send Wolverine Logan back to the past and tell Lancelot this fact. Wolverine Logan was sent back to 1973 by Shadowcat Kitty again, and just after returning, Wolverine Logan saw a scene that shocked him. Countless Sentry are surrounding Lancelot at this moment, and various mutant abilities are released crazily. Ice, fire, water, thunder, and other mutant abilities attack in turn. However, all the attacks suddenly disappeared when they were 10 meters away from Lancelot, as if there was an invisible barrier blocking these energy attacks. These Sentry, known by Wolverine Logan, are the second-generation Sentry, that is, the future Sentry. But at this moment, these sentry, no matter what ability they use, will disappear the moment they approach Lancelot. Reincarnation Eye Hungry Ghost Dao. Not only can energy absorbing, even the mutant ability will be completely absorbed by Hungry Ghost Dao and become the pure energy in Lancelot's body. Even if Sentry suddenly becomes a toad, he will absorb the mutant energy of Lancelot when he approaches Lancelot, and the original toad change will directly reverse the robot state. The cutting technique. At this moment, Lancelot's body was suspended in midair, his hands were opened, and the black sticks broke through the supersonic speed instantly under the terrifying repulsion. Bang bang bang. The black sticks hit all the sentry precisely, and at the same time, Lancelot's eyes of reincarnation burst into light, and the power belonging to the eyes of reincarnation was instantly transmitted to the bodies of all the sentry through the black sticks. Sentry's original scarlet mechanical eyes were replaced by reincarnation eyes at this moment, and Sentry, who was originally attacking, also stopped. These sentry have been controlled by Lancelot's eyes of reincarnation. Bring me the corpses of my comrades. Lancelot issued an order to the sentry in front of him, and within a few minutes, the group of sentry brought all the corpses of Hai Wangshao and others to Lancelot. Lancelot looked at the corpses of several compatriots lying under his feet, and his heart was even more angry. He swung his right hand, 10 black sticks pierced into the west of the corpses of these fellow mutants. 6 ways of puppet art. Lancelot's reincarnation eyes fluctuated slightly, and the Black Emperor Shao, White Queen Emma, Red Devil Azazo, Riptide, and Sabretooth Victor, who had already turned into corpses, all stood up. The eyes of these people have all turned into reincarnation eyes that are as unique as Lancelot. The Six Paths Puppet. Lancelot endowed his own Six Paths Puppet with the Heavenly Dao ability of his reincarnation eye through the black stick. Unlike Uzumaki Nagato, each of the Six Paths is given to one person. Lancelot just endowed his Six Paths Puppet, the strongest powerless power in the Eye of Samsara. Go, let this world feel the pain. Lancelot gave an order, and then the 6 puppets began to scatter away. 5 black dots appeared simultaneously in the sky of New York, Washington, San Francisco, Boston, and Sao Paulo. From now on, let the world feel the pain. Above New York, one of Lancelot's 6 puppets, White Queen Emma, opened her arms indifferently, and said this sentence in a cold and ruthless tone. A pair of reincarnation eyes are high above, looking down at the super city below. What is that? Black spot. It seems to be a person. I think it's a bird. The citizens of New York City, as if they felt something in their hearts, all looked up to the sky. Above the high altitude of New York City, they saw a black spot that almost covered the sun. Everyone is talking about it, but they don't know that the catastrophe that belongs to human beings is coming. Super Shenluo Tianzheng. Boom. White Queen Emma made another icy sound, and then a vast repulsive force centered on White Queen Emma, crashing down. It was like several nuclear bombs exploded. Everyone only saw a shockwave visible to the naked eye, and then the whole world was completely white. Rumble. The vast repulsive force is overwhelming. Starting from the center of New York, everything is melting in an instant. Silently, but shockingly eye-catching. And with the light of New York City, huge amounts of white light appeared in the other 5 cities, and then the entire worlds began to vibrate crazily. The timeline of the past 1973 that reversed the future came to an abrupt end at this moment. With the entire world being nuclear leveled by Lancelot, the future century began to disappear rapidly, and Wolverine Logan's consciousness was also forced to begin to return. I need to go to the future. Lancelot's mouth curled into a smile, and then he appeared directly in front of Wolverine Logan. Laugh. A black stick appeared in Lancelot's right hand, and Lancelot stabbed the black stick into Wolverine Logan's body. Then the power of the reincarnation eye was activated. Reverse the future in 2023. Wolverine Logan suddenly opened his eyes, a black rod slowly appeared in his body, and at the same time Wolverine Logan's eyes turned into reincarnation eyes. Spirituality. Wolverine Logan jumped up and pressed her right hand on the ground, while Lancelot in 1973 was instantly psychicized to 2023. Reversing the future in 2023, Wolverine Logan opened a pair of bright eyes of reincarnation, and he was endowed with the ability of animal life by Lancelot. Spiritualism. Wolverine Logan pressed her right hand on the ground, and then a group of mysterious runes emerged in front of all the mutants. Pong. A puff of white smoke rises from the mysterious rune array, and then Lancelot has appeared in front of the future mutant. Is this the future? Lancelot stepped forward, and the psychic art of the animal way of reincarnation can make Lancelot ignore the distance of time and space. He glanced at the mutants around, and then walked directly outside the base. Earth explosive star. Looking at Sentry who was still flying outside, Lancelot opened his right hand, and a small black ball floated towards the sky in an instant. Then a huge suction force exploded from the small ball, and countless Sentry were sucked into the sky. After finishing all this, Lancelot glanced back at the future mutants, then walked to the center of the base and sat down proudly. My king hail. After Lancelot sat down, the only remaining mutant 15, led by Professor X and Magneto, all bowed down. The future reversal has been terminated by me, and the Sentry crisis has disappeared. Lancelot opened his right hand, and Shadowcat Katie, standing behind the professor, appeared in front of Lancelot in an instant. Shadowcat Katie, your ability is very special. You can travel back in time from the atomic state. Lancelot looked at Shadowcat Katie in front of him, his eyes were full of admiration. The young Shadowcat Katie in front of her is the key to return to the correct time and space. My king, I can only send my consciousness back to the past. Looking at the extremely handsome Lancelot in front of her, Shadowcat Katie was a little nervous. Katie, don't belittle yourself, your ability is very special. Reaching out to touch Shadowcat's hair, Lancelot's face became serious. Geas, unleash the full potential of your mutant ability. Lancelot launched his own Geas directly at Shadowcat Katie. A bird emerged from Lancelot's eyes, and then flew into Shadowcat Katie's eyes. Shadowcat Katie only felt her brain roar, and then her body automatically floated up, and she felt a constant stream of power begin to emerge from her body. The original variant ability is rapidly increasing. And Shadowcat Katie's body also began to disperse into an atomic state in an instant, then reunited, and then continued to disperse. At this moment, Shadowcat Katie seems to have entered a magical world, a magical quantum world, where countless quantum particles float in front of Shadowcat Katie. It's so beautiful. Shadowcat Katie couldn't help murmuring, and her body began to emit a bright light. With the blessing of Lancelot's Geas, Shadowcat Katie's mutant ability was quickly raised to the ranks of the 6th level mutant. Also known as Omega Grade Mutant. Her variant ability, which also goes from penetrating objects, formally metamorphosis into time travel. Very good, Shadowcat Katie. Lancelot looked at Shadowcat Katie with admiration. This mutant girl who will appear in the future has endless potential. My king hail. Shadowcat Katie's body was reorganized from the atomic state, and she stepped in front of Lancelot, shouting a little excitedly. Now, Katie Shadowcat, open the way to the main universe for me. Lancelot patted Katie Shadowcat on the head lightly, and then gave the order. I obey, my great King Lancelot. Shadowcat Katie's eyes burst into golden light, and then she flicked in front of Lancelot lightly. The space-time in front of Lancelot was stirred instantly, and a space-time channel exuding colorful light appeared in front of Lancelot. And what the space-time channel is linked to is the timeline with the Mutant Evolution House. Lancelot turned his head and glanced at Professor X and the others, and then gave Shadowcat Katie and Mutant a flashing glance. Whether it's Shadowcat Katie's time-traveling variant ability, or the flickering space portal, it is an extremely powerful variant ability. However, these two abilities were rarely used by these two mutants. When Lancelot is going to perform the next eye-catching, he will directly transplant the flickering space portal. After getting the Eyes of Reincarnation, Lancelot has no fear of all threats on the Earth, but Lancelot is very clear. Even Earth in 1970 has many threats. Not to mention the upcoming Celestial Egg and the seeds of Celestial Egg. In terms of threats to Earth, the Apocalypse Crisis in the 1980s and the Kree invasion in the 1990s are all potential threats. The Earth has restricted the development of mutant. It's time to implement my space program. Lancelot's pupils contracted slightly, and he had already thought about the direction of future development. Possessing the ability of the Evolution Master Darwin, the House of Mutant Evolution can develop a variety of evolution directions for abilities in extreme environments. Even in the extreme vacuum of space, as long as Darwin is given time, Darwin can research it. If this is the case, then why must it be limited to the Earth? Space Mutant Evolution House, it's time to put it on the agenda. A smile appeared on the corner of Lancelot's mouth, and then he stepped into the space-time channel in front of him. Boom. And as Lancelot left here, the split timeline collapsed instantly, and then this collapsed timeline merged into the main universe. Since then, there are no futures such as X-Men 1, 2, and 3, only the New Mutant timeline, and the apocalypse that will wake up in the 1980s. Lancelot only felt that he had entered a strange and grotesque quantum world of Luli. His future eyes opened automatically, and began to receive changes in the non-universe timeline. A second later, Lancelot returned to the timeline of the main universe in 1973. He glanced around, and the location at this moment was the former base 780 in New Jersey. However, the current base in New Jersey has been completely abandoned. Lancelot turned his head and looked around. The timeline of reversing the future gradually disappeared like a dream bubble. Finally home. As the time now still in 1973. A deep smile appeared on the corner of Lancelot's mouth. He has already decided to lead the evolutionary family of Mutant to conquer the universe. The first thing to do is to return to the evolutionary home of Mutant, and then start to implement the space strategy just formulated by Lancelot. The House of Space Mutant Evolution will shine brightly in the not-too-distant future. And Lancelot finally decided to extend his existence throughout the Marvel MUC universe. P.S. The plot of reversing the future is indeed somewhat irrelevant to the main plot, and I don't know how Xiao Chongchong wrote it out of a feverish brain, so after realizing his mistake, Xiao Chongchong directly cut off the plot line. As for the next plot, Xiao Chongchong already has a mature outline, and the protagonist will be completely integrated into the MCU main universe. Spoiler here, the protagonist will build a mutant evolution home in space, so as to get rid of the embarrassment that time passes too slowly on Earth, 1 day in space, 1 year on Earth. At all stages of the Marvel plot, the protagonist can participate without worrying about timing. In 1973, Siberia Base, home of mutant evolution. Like a base in a small city, various researches are being carried out in an orderly manner at the moment. Countless mutants have settled here, and they are living quietly while cooperating with scientists to improve their mutant abilities. And at the moment on the top floor of the base, in a resplendent room, the mutant headed by White Queen Emma is sitting on a special metal round table. In the center of the round table, there are 3-dimensional images. This is the latest technology developed by Mutant Evolution House, stereoscopic projection. I still haven't found the whereabouts of my King Lancelot. White Queen Emma glanced at the Black Emperor Xiao who was sitting under her, and shook her head slightly. Bradley, what's the situation with the global equipment you're monitoring? Haiwang Xiao turned his head and looked at Bradley beside him. In 3 years, the House of Mutant Evolution has developed a brain wave strengthening device suitable for Bradley. Through the brain wave strengthening device, Bradley can control all electronic devices and networks in the world. I didn't find it. Bradley shook his head slightly. In the past 3 years, his body has been optimized several times, and he has become powerful, and he has long lived up to his previous weak and thin appearance. Although it can't reach the super soldier physique of Captain America, it also surpasses the human special forces. Magneto, where is Professor X? Black Emperor Xiao frowned, and then looked at Magneto Eric Lenscher. Compared to 3 years ago, Magneto has become more mature and stable now, and after Professor X eliminated his hatred, he has reunited with a girl from the Mutant Evolution House. Professor X has searched the world with a brainwave strengthening machine, but found nothing. Magneto was wearing a decent special metal combat uniform, looking very cool and handsome, but at this moment his brows were furrowed, and he shook his head a little disappointed. Is that so? Raven, what happened to our research? White Queen Emma glanced at Magneto with some disappointment, then turned her head and asked Mystique Raven beside her. We have developed the X-gene enhancer, which can enhance the power of the X-gene. However, the effect of the X-gene enhancement is not obvious at present. At the same time, based on the genes of me and Darwin, we have developed a special biological armor, the variant Sentry armor. Mystique Raven lightly clicked on the metal tabletop in front of him with his right hand, and then a special biological armor was projected on the tabletop. Sentry armor. Just like the Sentry that reversed the future, it does not have an intelligent system. It belongs to the exoskeleton armor, which can make corresponding changes according to the environment and the attacks it withstands. I see. Continue to advance steadily. White Queen Emma nodded knowingly, and then clicked on her bracelet with her right hand. The entire magnificent room suddenly turned into a pure white space. The Mind Booster is a special mind device developed by the scientists of Evolution House. Through this device, the power of the mind can be amplified, and the power of the mind can be used to simulate the environment imagined in the brain. Stay alert and wait for my king's return. White Queen Emma stood up, raising her arms and shouting, "My king hail, mutants and glory." All the mutants in the room also raised their arms and shouted, their eyes turned wildly. "Miss Emma, it's an emergency." Suddenly, Darwin, wearing a scientific white coat, walked in. In Darwin's hand, there was also a special eyeball-like lens. This is a special retinal lens adapted by Darwin in an extreme environment, which can realize retinal sharing. What happened? Darwin. White Queen Emma glanced at Darwin with some doubts, then picked up the eye lens, and crushed it with slight force. Pong! The eyeball lens shattered, and at the moment the lens shattered, pictures were clearly presented in front of all mutants. In the picture, in front of the ruins of the U.S. military base in New Jersey, a gigantic mouse emerged from the sewer of the base, and then the mouse swayed and stood up, turning into a mutant in casual clothes. At this moment, Mutant was staring blankly at the ruins in front of him, the retinas of his eyes flickered, and he clearly transmitted the picture he saw to the eye lens of Mutant's Evolution House. "My king, it's my King Lancelot." White Queen Emma looked at the picture in front of her in surprise. Above the ruins of the base in New Jersey, an unparalleled figure floated quietly. The moment she saw this figure, White Queen Emma already knew the identity of this figure. It was Lancelot, the king of mutants who had disappeared for 3 years. "Hurry up, the Red Devil Asazo, quickly bring us to meet our king." Mystique Raven was also extremely excited. After 3 years, she didn't want to wait for a moment. Teleportation. The Red Devil Asazuo tapped his bracelet with his right hand, and then a huge amount of red mist flooded the entire room. When the red mist disappeared, White Queen Emma and others also disappeared. With the help of the scientists of the House of Evolution, the teleportation of the Red Devil Azazuo no longer needs to stand in a row hand in hand. Where the red mist passes, when the space jumps. Pong! Over the ruins of the base in New Jersey, Lancelot was looking at the ruins in front of him with great interest, and then a cloud of huge amounts of red mist emerged out of thin air. Within the red mist, all the mutant comrades that Lancelot was familiar with came out. White Queen Emma, Black Emperor Shao, Red Devil Azazo, Riptide, Sabretooth Victor, Gambit Remy, Phantom John, Magneto Eric and more than a dozen mutants all knelt on one knee. "Congratulations on my king's return." Everyone's eyes were shining with a bird singing at the moment, and they used their thoughts to express their respect for Lancelot. "I'm back." Lancelot slowly landed beside White Queen Emma, with his hands outstretched, announcing his return in an impassioned tone. "My King Yang Yao 3. Mutant Yang Yao." All the mutants shouted frantically. They had been waiting for 3 years, and finally the return of the King of Mutants came. Let's go home." Lancelot looked at the mutant in front of him with satisfaction, and gently held the arms of White Queen Emma and Mystique Ruiman. Boom! Once again, a cloud of huge amounts of red mist emerged from the body of the Red Devil Azazuo. The red mist surged, and all the mutants that touched the red mist disappeared here at the same time. Lancelot, come back strong. In 1973, Siberia Base, home of mutant evolution. A billowing red mist emerged from the void, and then Lancelot led the mutants back here. "I finally returned to the main universe." Lancelot couldn't help sighing as he looked at the familiar mutant evolution home in front of him. The House of Mutant Evolution is the mutant base that I established in 1962. After 11 years of development, it already has a shadow of a modern cutting-edge technology base. Cutting-edge equipment beyond this era is everywhere, and countless biotechnologies can be seen everywhere at this moment. In the living area of the base, there are crystal-clear eyeballs suspended. These eyeballs are broadcasting news from all over the world in real time. 3-dimensional projections radiate from these eyeballs, as if entering the era of science fiction. In addition to these eyeballs, biological skeletons called angel wings have been widely used. Many mutants have a pair of huge amounts of white wings floating behind them, soaring freely into the sky. Bio-strengthening serum has become a must for everyone, whether it is an ordinary human or a mutant. As long as they are weak, they can inject this bio-strengthening serum to improve their physical fitness to the human limit level. The directed evolution device has also been placed in the living area of the base. Some thrill-loving humans and mutants will use the directed evolution device to customize a set of unique organs for themselves: blue skin, red eyes, and animal claws. Flame tattoos and more are everywhere. Thanks to the directional evolution device, even ordinary humans can obtain mutant abilities, adjust their body, the file size, depth of certain organs of the body, etc., which has become a common thing for Sikong. Various bio-black technologies have made the mutant evolutionary home hundreds of years ahead of the Earth. Has it developed to this level? A smile appeared on Lancelot's face. The House of Mutant Evolution has completely opened the shackles of biological evolution. Under the leadership of Mutant, human beings are on the way to a higher dimensional evolution. Hurricane. Mind, space, body, mutant ability, and evolution are almost all aspects of development. My lord, we have opened the door to the glory of biological evolution. Beside Lancelot, White Queen Emma also showed a proud smile on her face, and said with a chuckle, "Good job, my fellow mutants." Lancelot led White Queen Emma and others from the edge of the base all the way to his own throne, and Shishiren sat down. Then a pair of red eyes of reincarnation stared down at the fellow mutants in front of them. Wanxiang Tianian. Lancelot raised his right hand lightly, and a soft gravitational force instantly covered White Queen Emma's body, pulling White Queen Emma into Lancelot's arms. Human world memory reading. Lancelot's reincarnation eyes were shining brightly, his right hand lightly touched White Queen Emma's forehead, but in an instant, Lancelot had seen the 3 years since he disappeared, the development of the main universe. In 1970, Howard's son, Tony Stark, was born. That same year, the future superheroes returned to their base in New Jersey to hunt for Pym particles and Tesseract. However, because Lancelot had already controlled Dr. Pym and sent Dr. Pym back to the House of Mutant Evolution, the future Captain America and the future Iron Man returned without success. Moreover, in the absence of Pym particles, the future Captain America and Iron Man can only be forced to stay in this era, relying on the information left by Dr. Pym to start developing Pym particles from scratch. Even with Tony Stark's extremely intelligent brain, it took them a year to research the Pym particles, and they were able to return to the future in 1971. In 1971, Lynn Tay Barton, the future superhero Hawkeye, was born. In the same year, the House of Mutant Evolution developed a brain-wave strengthening device suitable for Bradley. Bradley's thoughts enveloped the world and began to secretly monitor the entire world. In 1972, Drive. Annie Zola, the leader of Hydra, was suffering from cancer. He turned to Evolution Glory Biopharmaceutical Company for help, and prayed for a bottle of anti-cancer serum. However, Drive. Zola, who was in vain, began a frenzied consciousness experiment, and will soon when he died BFAI, he was able to upload his consciousness to the old computer. In 1973, the Strategic Science Corps formulated the Pegasus Project, and Howard, as a strategic science consultant, also participated in the Pegasus Project and discovered a special new element when studying Tesseract. Unfortunately, with the technology of the 1970s, Howard could not manufacture this new element, he could only hide it, and gave it to the future Tony Stark as a gift. In 3 years, the world has not changed much. Although technology has developed, it is not obvious. Lancelot took his right hand from White Queen Emma's head, and all the changes in the world in the past 3 years were read by Lancelot. Take it out. The development of the Earth is too slow, and it has begun to restrict the development of our mutant evolutionary home. Lancelot frowned. In 3 years, the Earth's technology has started to surge all the way except the Wakanda Kingdom, relying on vibranium, but human technology is into a bottleneck period. This situation will continue until the 1990s, when there will be another big explosion in technology, and various modern technologies will spring up like mushrooms after rain. Darwin, from now on, put all your adaptive evolution science research on hold, and do your best to adapt to the extreme environment of space survival. Lancelot raised his head, looked at Darwin below, and ordered. Yes, my king. Darwin knelt down on one knee and replied respectfully after receiving Lancelot's order. Red Devil Azazuo, go and find me a human corpse. Lancelot looked at the Red Devil Azazuo again, and said, Yes, my king. A red mist gushed out of Azazo's body, and then his figure flickered for a while. When the red mist disappeared, he had already appeared in front of Lancelot with the corpse of a young white man. The eyes of reincarnation. Lancelot opened the eyes of reincarnation directly, raised his right hand, and immediately pierced the corpse of the white man in front of him one by one with black sticks. Swish! And as Lancelot's black stick penetrated, the corpse of the white man who had closed his eyes opened his eyes suddenly, and in his eyes, the eyes of reincarnation were rolling like ripples in the water. Lancelot manipulated the white corpse in front of him to stand up, and then endowed the six-path puppet with the power of heaven. "This is my king." White Queen Emma looked at the resurrected white body in amazement, and couldn't help asking. "This is my heavenly Tao, I named it Pain." Lancelot simply said a word, then closed his eyes. Through the black stick on heavenly Tao Pain, Lancelot's consciousness was all transferred to heavenly Tao Pain. Kakaka, slightly moving his body. At this moment, this Tian Tao Pain has been pierced with black sticks all over his body, which makes this six-way puppet extremely flexible, even times more flexible than a living person. Asazo, send my way of heaven into extraterrestrial orbit. I want to build a space home for Mutant. The Red Devil Azazo, send my way of heaven to the extraterrestrial orbit. Siberia base, home of mutant evolution. At this moment, the main body of Lancelot seems to have fallen into a deep sleep, and the handsome Tian Tao Pain it created made a low and cold voice. Heavenly Pain. All the mutants in front of Lancelot looked at the heavenly Tao Pain with a special black stick on his face, and took a breath for a moment. Although their mutant evolutionary family has conquered aging and disease, they have not conquered death. Seeing at this moment that under the control of Lancelot, the lost corpse was resurrected, so it didn't surprise them. Even Hai Wang Xiao, who has survived World War II, can't help but sigh at the moment that Lancelot's power is really unpredictable. "My lord, what is the space home you are talking about?" Mystique Raven looked at the heavenly Tao Pain in front of him, and then asked the question that all mutants care about. "The Earth is really too small for our mutants. It's too small for our mutants to toss about." Lancelot opened his mouth, his tone extremely proud. "We have grasped the key to evolution and embarked on a glorious evolutionary path. However, the human beings we live in are still ignorant and muddled. In ancient times, human beings called the existence of magical power gods and worshipped them fanatically. Now, for our mutant evolution family, we have been hundreds of years ahead of human evolution. Humans are still standing still." Lancelot gave an impassioned speech again, his voice was deep and powerful, deafening. "We mutants have surpassed human beings and opened the way to the race of gods. We mutants are destined to become gods that human beings look up to. Gods don't live with humans. We mutants should stand in the sky and live above humans." Lancelot's theory that gods don't live with humans made the surrounding mutants excited again. As Lancelot said, in ancient times, human beings were ignorant and faced the existence of magical powers, they were in awe of gods. And the current situation is similar to the ancient times. Human beings are still ignorant, but the mutant family has already mastered the code of biological evolution, got rid of birth, old age, sickness and death, and has begun to call the wind and rain. For human beings, this is the mighty power of gods. The mutant family is the new god of this era. God does not live with man. White Queen Emma and others shouted frantically in unison, and they looked at Lancelot with burning eyes. It is this man who has brought mutant evolution and glory now, and pointed out the next path for mutant. God of mutants. In ancient times, the Asgard Protoss lived at the top of the world tree. Now, I will lead the mutants to build their own abode of gods. Lancelot controlled Tian Tao Pain to a computer, and then found the Earth-Moon satellite in the picture. Lancelot randomly zoomed in on the Earth-Moon satellite map, and then clicked on the back of the moon. Living in space, looking down on the Earth. Lancelot set the tone for his own space program, and all the mutants looked excitedly at the satellite map of the Earth and Moon in front of them. They were shocked by the grand space program shown by Lancelot. What a crazy and arrogant idea this is. It seems nonsense to build a homeland belonging to mutants into space, but with mutants' endless variant ability, it may not be a day that cannot be realized. And once realized, the mutant family will be completely human and become the god of mutants. Hold high the sky and look down on all beings. My king hail. Mutant Yongyao. The crowd couldn't help shouting enthusiastically. They were excited about Lancelot's space program and were about to metamorphosis. They were proud of the future of the gods mutant. Azazo. After explaining his space plan to his mutant comrades, Lancelot turned his attention to the Red Devil Azazo. Obey, my king. The Red Devil Azazo performed an ancient courtesy to Lancelot, and then a billowing red mist emerged from his body. Boom. The red mist covered Lancelot's Tiandalpain, and then the Red Devil Azazo and Tiandalpain disappeared in the mutant evolution house in an instant. In the outer space of the Earth, in the vast dark universe, several satellites are revolving around the Earth alone. And in such a deep dark space, a mass of red mist squeezed out from the void, and then the red mist disappeared in a flash, leaving only a human figure. Is this the outer space of the Earth? It really is the deep space of the universe. At this moment, Tiandalpain's body is suspended in the outer space of the Earth. The vacuum environment has no effect on Tiandalpain, who has become a corpse. In this deep, dark and vast cosmic vacuum without gravity, Lancelot's heavenly Dalpain also lost gravity, and began to levitate horizontally. Repulsion. Feeling the changes in his body, Tiandalpain's reincarnation eyes burst out a huge repulsion, and the repulsion instantly covered Tiandalpain's whole body. Tiandalpain's body regained its center of gravity, as if standing on the Earth. The repulsive force formed a repulsive film, which repelled all the surrounding cosmic rays. Heaven has the ability to manipulate gravitation and repulsion, and the rotation and revolution of planets in the universe rely on gravitation and repulsion. Boom. At this moment, the repulsive force in Tiandalpain's body exploded, and his body rushed towards the moon among the Earth-Moon satellites at a terrifying speed in the cosmic vacuum. At this moment, Tiandalpain's speed far exceeds the escape velocity of the third cosmic velocity, and driven by repulsion, Kdalpain's speed is getting faster and faster. Just like that, Tiandalpain flew into the vast and boundless universe, and the huge Earth behind him was rapidly shrinking. After a day's flight, Tiandalpain had already reached the moon. Lancelot controlled Tiandalpain to adjust the repulsive force on his body, and then slowly landed on the moon's surface. It only took 1 day to reach the moon, which is far behind the speed of Captain Marvel. Standing on the surface of the moon, Tiandalpain shook his head slightly, very dissatisfied with his speed. After the birth of Captain Marvel, she was able to fly beyond the speed of light, and the distant universe became a cosmic time in front of the speed. However, Lancelot used the repulsion force of heaven to fly, and it took a full day of flight to reach the moon, which made Lancelot very dissatisfied. Definitely, this is because the distance between Lancelot's body and Tiandalpain is too far, and the power transmission of the reincarnation eye has been weakened a lot. Lancelot looked at the moon under his feet through the reincarnation eye of Tiandalpain, and then his body suspended again. Boom! Tiandalpain quickly flew above the moon, but within a moment, he had already reached the back of the moon where the sun cannot shine. Looking at the extremely dark backside of the moon, Lancelot frowned slightly. He was the first to give up the idea of using the backside of the moon as the base of his home of space evolution. There is no reason for it, the back of the moon is too dark. It seems that I can only make one by myself. Lancelot quickly lifted off, broke away from the back of the moon, stood in the dark cosmic vacuum, and looked at the vast starry sky. Tiandalpain stretched out his right hand. Super Vientian Sky Yin. The small planet belt beyond Mars was suddenly shrouded by a terrifying gravitational force, and then countless meteorites began to converge towards the moon under the traction of gravity. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.